Welcome to Creepy Vibes. Today, we're heading deep into Texas, into small towns where the streets go quiet after dark. And the real horror begins. These are 20 true night shift encounters from people who worked alone. And weren't a janitor, who locked himself in and carved warnings into the walls. A nurse who heard breathing through a dead intercom. A gas station clerk who served someone already buried. These stories aren't made up. They happened. And they'll haunt you, but here's the twist. Most people vanish before the scariest parts. They forget to subscribe, and they miss what waits in the dark. Don't be one of them. Hit that button now. Tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it? Because in these towns, after midnight, the shadows move on their own. This is 20 true night shift encounters from small Texas towns. Let's begin. Cotulla wasn't much of a town by the time the last graduating class trickled out of the high school in '97. Folks blamed it on the economy. Some blamed it on the oil drying up. Others just blamed the heat and the way it never seemed to break, not even at night. The school sat right on the edge of town, a squat building with cracked windows and a roof that sagged in the middle like tired shoulders. Nobody used it anymore, not for teaching anyway, but the county kept a skeleton crew for upkeep. Mostly. Just one guy, Robert Mendez. Everyone called him Bobby. Bobby was the kind of man who never talked unless he had to. 50-something, barrel-chested, slow-moving, thick hands like worn leather gloves. He swept the halls, mopped the cafeteria floor that hadn't seen kids in decades, made sure the windows stayed boarded, and kept the boiler running even though no one really understood why. Maybe it was just habit. Maybe they didn't want to admit the place had died. The school board left him a small office in the front lobby with a radio, a cot, and a clock that hadn't ticked in years. Bobby didn't mind. He liked the quiet. Said it was better than living with his sister in Laredo, better than dealing with people. He smoked in the janitor's closet and played old Tejano music on cassette tapes. At night, you could sometimes hear the faint hum of accordion through the warped glass doors if you walked by slow enough. The story begins on a Tuesday, right after a thunderstorm had rolled through and knocked out half the town's power. Bobby radioed in that he'd be staying overnight to check the fuses and relight the boiler pilot if needed. Standard stuff. He'd done it a dozen times. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except the next morning when the county clerk stopped by to drop off supplies. The front doors were still locked from the inside. No sign of Bobby. His truck sat in the lot, keys dangling from the ignition. The school was silent. Too silent. Like it had exhaled all its air and decided never to breathe. Again, they found him in the boiler room around noon. The metal door was locked tight from the inside, and the tiny porthole window was fogged with condensation. It took the fire department 10 minutes to cut through the hinges. When they got it open, the place was suffocatingly hot, the kind of wet heat that shouldn't come from a machine set on minimum. The overhead light swung lazily, casting shadows in slow arcs across the sweating walls. Bobby was on the floor, curled into himself, his hands clutching a keyring so tight they had to break his fingers to get it free. His eyes were open, staring at nothing, but it wasn't the stare that got them. It was the scratches. Deep, jagged gouges carved into the cinder block walls. Not just random marks, but letters. Words, repeated phrases like someone had been trying to write their way out. She's in the wall seat, didn't open it, it opened at me. Boiler hissed behind him, rhythmic and steady like a slow, patient breath. No burns on Bobby, no sign of a struggle. But the nails on his right hand were worn to the quick, down to raw bleeding flesh. The county wrote it up as a mental break. Soured maybe the isolation got to him. Stress, maybe a stroke. They boxed up his things, drained the boiler for good, and locked the school up tight. But that wasn't the end. A month after Bobby's death, the power company logged a spike in energy usage from the school just for a few minutes, sometime around 3 in the morning. Security cams, long since considered unreliable, flickered back on. The boiler room light glowed again. Nobody went to check it out. They just cut the lines and filed the footage away. But the janitor's keys, they kept them in evidence just because. The ring was heavy, rusted in places, and one of them, the long silver one for the boiler room, never stopped swinging, even in a sealed bag. Even when nothing moved around it. A year later, some out-of-towners bought the land, planned to turn the school into a haunted attraction. Good marketing, they figured, lean into the creepy small-town vibe. They opened up for one night only. One. The next morning, they found the main hallway flooded with rusty water and claw marks gouged into the painted murals of smiling children. No one talks much about Bobby now. Just a whisper if you're at the gas station late and someone brings up the old schoolhouse. You might hear that he wasn't the first to go into that boiler room and never come back quite right. You might even hear that sometimes if the wind's blowing just wrong. You can still catch the faint hum of Tejano music drifting out from behind the bricked-up doors, slow and sad like something trying to remember what it was before it started. Scratching dot, but nobody goes back. Not really. Not at night. And especially not if they hear the click of keys behind them when no one else is there. The clerk's name was Dylan Carr, 27, wiry, quiet, and mostly invisible in the town of Goliad, Texas. He worked the overnight shift at a gas station off Highway 59, a lonely patch of cracked concrete and humming fluorescents surrounded by mesquite and barbed wire. It wasn't the kind of place folks stopped at unless they had to. Most passed it by without noticing the single rusting sign that read, "Last fuel for 40 miles." The roof sagged. The bugs buzzed. And after dark, the place started feeling like it wasn't really part of the map anymore. Dylan didn't mind. He liked the quiet. The hum of the freezers, the soft ding of the door chime when someone wandered in, the smell of rubber and diesel. No one bothered him. No manager breathing down his neck, just a clipboard with checkboxes. And an old radio that only picked up Spanish baseball games and static. He read sci-fi paperbacks, nursed cold coffee, and smoked too much. Every now and then, he'd call his sister in Corpus just to hear someone familiar, but even that had gotten less frequent. Nights blurred together. The world ended at the edge of the parking lot. The night it happened started out like all the others. The sky was bruised purple, cicadas screaming into the dark, and heat still rising off the pavement in ghostly waves. A single truck came through around 11 and old Peterbilt pulling. A livestock trailer, driver just buying jerky and a Mountain Dew. After that, nothing, not a soul. Dylan logged the inventory, mopped the bathrooms, restocked the coolers, and went outside for a smoke around 2 a.m. That's when the car pulled in. No headlights, no engine sound. Just appeared like the dark itself had coughed it up. Dylan saw the shimmer of chrome first, headlights catching nothing, just reflections of the gas station canopy. The car was black older model, maybe a 70s Lincoln, but something was off about its shape. Too long, too low. It glided instead of rolled tires whispering over the concrete like they weren't even touching it. The door opened, but no one got out. Dylan squinted through the smoke and stepped forward. Need a fill-up? The door stayed open. Interior dark. Couldn't see the dash, the seats, nothing. He felt a strange pressure in his ears, like when a storm's rolling in. Behind him, the lights above Pump 3 flickered once. Then again, then died. The gas station was cast in a sickly yellow glow now, half lit and buzzing. The insects had gone silent. Dylan walked to the pump, still staring into the open car. You want regular or premium? No answer. He looked around. Empty. Highway as dead as ever. Nothing but shadows and the smell of oil. With a shrug, Dylan unscrewed the tank cap. It was already off. That was the first thing he should have noticed. Cars don't pull up with the cap already off. But his brain lagged behind his body like a movie out of sync. He hooked the nozzle, started the pump. The machine didn't tick like normal. No beeps, no meter moving. But the hose pulsed in his hand like it was breathing. He heard footsteps behind him. He turned quickly. No one there. When he turned back, the car door had closed. The windows were rolled up now, too dark to see through, but something was pressed against the passenger glass. A hand? A face? He couldn't tell. Then a voice came. Not from the car, not from the pump, but from right beside his ear. "You're empty too, Dylan." He jumped back, swinging the nozzle like a weapon. It thudded uselessly against his thigh. His breath came shallow. His eyes scanned the dark, searching for the source. Nothing. He stepped back toward the store, hose still dangling in his grip. The car didn't move. Didn't make a sound. The pump was still running, meter still dead. Inside, the security camera feed showed static on pump 3. Dylan blinked, leaned closer to the screen. There was something moving in the static. A shape? A silhouette? He turned to the window. The car was gone, not driving away, not pulling out onto the highway. Just gone, but the pump hose was still lying on the ground. He stepped outside. The smell of gas was thick now, metallic and sour. The pavement shimmered with a sheen of fuel. He bent down, clicked the handle back into place. His hands were shaking. He went to check the footage, rewound it manually. The recording showed him walking outside, talking, standing by the pump. But he was alone. No car, no other person, no headlights, no shadows. Just Dylan, holding a nozzle in midair, speaking to the empty night. He watched himself tilt his head as if listening to something. Then, at exactly 2:07 a.m., he turned toward the pump bay, walked into the darkness between pumps 3 and 4, and didn't come back out. The screen froze there. Dylan blinked. He was still in the booth, watching the tape, but he remembered going back inside, didn't he? He remembered rewinding it, watching it, except the seat was cold under him. The coffee was untouched. The register said, "Last transaction, 10:59 p.m." The lights buzzed in a low, feverish hum. He reached for his phone. Dead. Not powered off, just blank. The wall clock had stopped. His mouth felt dry, his tongue thick. He turned to the radio, hoping for some static, some voice. It crackled once, and then the voice came again. "You're empty too, Dylan." He ran, out of the booth, into the night. The canopy lights flickered violently now, casting warped shadows. The pumps were glistening wet, but not with gas. With something darker, thicker. It dripped from the nozzle onto the ground and hissed as it touched concrete. The car was back, but it wasn't parked this time. It hovered just above the surface, a few inches of separation, vibrating slightly. And the door opened again. Dylan didn't move. Something inside the car moved, though. Slid forward. A shape long, twisted. Like a man who'd been pulled too far, joints bending the wrong way. The figure stepped out slowly. The sound its foot made on the ground was not a footstep. It was like meat hitting tile. Wet and final. The man, or what had once been one, tilted its head toward Dylan. Its face was featureless, smeared like clay. No mouth, no eyes, but it seemed to see just fine. "You called us," it said in a voice that was his own. "You've been calling for years." Dylan backed away. "I didn't. You wanted out. You said you hated it here, that no one ever saw you, that you trade anything for a change. I didn't mean." "We heard." The thing stepped closer, and we came, just like you asked. The last thing Dylan Carr saw was himself, his own face mirrored on that thing's head, staring back at him with a sad, sympathetic smile. And then darkness swallowed everything. The next morning, Sheriff Mendez got a call from a trucker who'd pulled in for gas. Found the place empty. Coffee still warm. Cigarette half smoked in the ashtray. No clerk. They checked the tapes. Dylan walked out at 2:07 alone. He was never seen again, but some nights, around the same time, Pump 3 lights up all by itself. No car. No customer. Just the sound of footsteps and a voice on the radio whispering through the static. You're empty too. The first time Miranda noticed him, she was on her second refill round at Dot's Diner in Plainview, Texas. It was one of those long, drawn-out nights where the town felt as hollow as a discarded husk, only two regulars nursing black coffee. At the counter, a drunk trucker passed out in a booth, and the low hum of the cooler buzzing like a dying fly. Miranda had just turned 27, divorced once, and already convinced her life had peaked sometime around junior year. She didn't mind the graveyard shift. Not really. Less bullshit, fewer smiles to fake. Just the comforting monotony of coffee pots, country music bleeding softly from the jukebox, and silence thick as dust. That night, she was wiping down table 6 when she felt this weird tug, like the kind you feel when someone's staring. She looked up. Across the street, where McAllister's appliance once stood, there was a man in the window, or, rather, behind it. At first, she thought maybe it was a trick of light, something bouncing off the glass, maybe a reflection. But no, he was too. Still, too solid. A dark figure standing behind the grimy front window. No movement, no blinking. Just watching. The thing was, McAllister's had been closed for nearly 40 years. Boarded up, condemned, hollowed out by a fire sometime in the 80s. The windows had been shattered and patched haphazardly with plywood, but one corner of the front pane still held a slice of glass like a jagged tooth. That's where he stood, right there, in that wedge of unbroken glass. Watching her, she blinked, stepped closer to the door, pressing her palm to the glass of the diner window to cut the glare. He was gone. By the time her shift ended at 4 a.m., Miranda had convinced herself it was nothing. Her mind playing tricks. Maybe one of those shadows that forms when your body's half running on caffeine and half on fumes. But still, something about it crawled under her skin. The next night, she checked again, and there he was. Same spot, same glass, same motionless stare. This time she stood longer, coffee pot cradled against her hip, watching him like he was watching her. He didn't flinch. Didn't move. Just a silhouette, tall, maybe 6 feet or more, and wearing what looked like an old overcoat. Not modern, either. The kind with heavy shoulders and big lapels. World War II era, maybe. She noticed something else, too. He wasn't quite at window height. He was higher, like the floor beneath him should have been gone. But he was still standing like it was there, like time hadn't eaten the place hollow. She asked Earl about it. He'd been cooking back there since the 60s. Older than God and tougher than gristle. When she described what she saw, he stopped chopping onions and went real still. You saw him too, huh? Her blood turned to slush. What do you mean? Earl didn't look at her. Just kept his eyes on the cutting board. Back in '95, girl named Janie used to work here. Said the same damn thing. Thought she was going crazy. Kept saying there was a man in the McAllister window. But every time someone else looked, nothing was there. What happened to her? He finally looked up, eyes darker than usual. She stopped showing up, left a note under the register. Sod, he was calling her. Said she could hear him tapping on the glass at night. Miranda didn't sleep that day. She pulled up old news clippings online, combed through dusty archives. She found a mention of the fire. August 1984. Electrical short sparked it. No deaths reported. But then she found something else buried in a scanned police log, a complaint filed weeks before the fire. A customer at McAllister's claimed a salesman wouldn't leave her alone, said he stared too long, followed her to her car. There was no record of an arrest. That night, Miranda brought a pair of binoculars. She waited until 2:43 a.m. That was the time he always appeared. Like clockwork, as if something tethered him to that minute. She lifted the binoculars and saw him more clearly than ever. He wasn't just watching, he was smiling. Pale lips, thin and dry, stretched into a grin that didn't fit his face. His eyes were too deep, too hollow, like someone had scooped them out and left shadows behind. He lifted a hand, tapped the glass. 3 slow taps. She dropped the binoculars and screamed. Earl came running out from the back, spatula in hand, ready to kill a cockroach or a coyote. But when she pointed across the street, he saw nothing. Nothing but old boards and peeling paint. By the next week, she was barely holding it together. She started seeing him more often, not just at the diner, in the back of the bus, in the window of her 3rd-floor apartment, in the screen of her turned-off TV, always the same, motionless, smiling, watching, and always at 2:43. A dot and dot. She taped black paper over her windows, unplugged her television, stopped going to work. But still, the tapping started. Not loud, just faint, always from the window. 3 slow taps. One night she found a photograph slipped under her door. An old black and white, the kind you'd find in a shoebox or flea market. It showed the storefront of McAllister's Appliances in 1963. A grand opening. Banner draped across the glass. Balloons. Smiling employees. There he was. Front and center. Same coat. Same grin. Same eyes. She took the photo to the police. They shrugged. Suggested she see someone. She tried burning it. It didn't catch. Tried soaking it in bleach. Nothing. She buried it in a field 30 miles away in a coffee can wrapped in duct tape and prayer. The next morning, it was tucked neatly under her pillow. She couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. The taps grew louder. The windows began to rattle. And then one night, just before 3 a.m., she saw him standing inside her apartment. Not in the window. This time, not behind the glass. Inside. She screamed until her throat bled. But no one came. They found her 2 days later, curled in the corner of her kitchen, rocking and muttering the same thing over and over. He's in the window. He's in the window. There's no floor, but he's still standing. They checked. The apartment. Locked windows. No sign of forced entry. No fingerprints. Just the photo framed and hanging neatly above her bed. Dot's Diner is still there. They painted the walls peach. Replaced the jukebox with a touchscreen. The night waitress is younger now, college girl working her way through school. Sometimes, she glances out the window around 2:45, just to check. And sometimes, just sometimes, she sees a man in a long coat, standing in a window that shouldn't be there. Smiling, tapping. Still watching. They say Paris, Texas has 2 kinds of quiet. There's the small town kind that settles over the streetlights and empty parking. Lots like a warm flannel blanket, what you get outside the Dairy Queen after 11 p.m. or in the cemetery on a Sunday afternoon. But then there's the other kind, the kind that feels thick and wrong. Like standing in a soundproof room with a storm outside you can't quite hear, but feel pounding against the walls. That's the kind of quiet that hung around the Lamar County Coroner's office at night, especially in the lower levels where they kept the cold cabinets and gurneys. Daniel Morey was the night attendant, had been for 6 years running, and he didn't much believe in anything besides schedules and silence. He didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't mess with women anymore, said he'd had enough of people dying in his arms during hospice work back in Amarillo. When he moved to Paris, they hired him on the spot. No one else wanted to work the graveyard shift in the building that shared a parking lot with the county morgue and the jail. Too many folks said it gave them the willies. Said it stank in ways. It shouldn't, even with all the chemicals. But Daniel didn't scare easy. Not from stories, anyway. It started slow. Like most bad things do. The toe tags moved. That was the first sign. He had the place arranged just how he liked it. Every time a body came in, he logged it in a thick ledger. He didn't trust the digital system. Wrote down the date, cause of death if known, initials, identifying marks, and where he put the body. Most were unremarkable. Overdoses, car crashes, heat stroke. A few stabbings, once in a while a Jane Doe from some back road where buzzards beat the troopers to her. He'd check the drawer numbers against the tags on each corpse during stirring. His 3 a.m. round, like clockwork. Just a quick walk past, flashlight in hand, hum of the freezer compressor in the background. But one night in late October, when the wind howled like a starving dog outside, he noticed the tags didn't line up. Drawer 6B should have held Pamela T. Young, fentanyl, wrist scarred. Like railway tracks. But the tag on that drawer read LS, and Pamela's was hanging from the toe of a man 2 rows over. He figured it was his own mistake. Switched them back, made a note to double check in the morning, maybe check the backup cameras. Except, the cameras didn't catch anything. The logs showed no one else had entered. The doors stayed sealed. The footage played through in grainy black and white stillness, the drawers untouched. The next night, it happened again. And the one after. He tried taping the tags down. Tried binding the bodies tighter, zip-tying the tags to the gurneys. He even took Polaroids of each setup and checked them at the start and end of every shift. And still, somehow, the tags were wrong when he made his rounds. Names appearing that weren't in the book. Ruth M., Bobby H., Jonas D. Names with no files, no intake records, no trace in the system. As if the dead were swapping places behind closed drawers, playing some grim game of musical chairs while the living slept upstairs. Daniel didn't say anything to his supervisor. He knew what it would sound like. Instead, he started carrying his old hospice rosary in his pocket, even though he hadn't said a prayer in years. Just rubbed the beads between his fingers when he walked past the cabinets. Just in case. The voices came later. It was maybe 2 a.m, early November. The rain had turned cold, falling in sheets against the narrow windows, and Daniel had his thermos open, half full of stale diner coffee. He was sitting in the hallway outside the body storage unit, flipping through an old Louis L'Amour paperback he kept in his locker, when he heard it. A voice, soft, male, maybe older, whispered, "Is she here?" Daniel froze. He thought maybe it was the pipes. The damn place always creaked. But then it came again, clearer this time. "Is Ruth here?" He stood slowly, eyes fixed on the door to the cold room. No footsteps. No slam of an opening entrance. Just the soft whir of the AC and the hum of fluorescence overhead. He walked to the cold room, unlocked the reinforced door, and stepped inside. The temperature hit him in the chest like it always did, sharp, wet, bone deep. He scanned the drawers. And there it was. The tag on drawer 4A had changed. It now read, in shaky black pen, Ruth M. 1946 to 1983. Daniel checked his ledger. No Ruth. No 1946. No intake that night. He pulled the drawer open, heart pounding so loud it nearly drowned out the soft scrape of the gurney rails. The body was new. Pale, like most, but with an aged face, sunken cheeks, liver spots, white hair. In a neat bun. Her mouth hung slightly open, one hand curled at her side as though it had been reaching for something. She hadn't been there. Yesterday, Daniel slammed the drawer shut and stumbled back. He told himself it was a prank. Someone from the day shift, maybe. A Halloween joke that got out of hand. He made a note to confront the others, check their logins, make damn sure no one was sneaking around on his watch. That night, he didn't. Sleep when his shift ended. He went home, sat on his recliner, and stared at the blank TV screen until the sun came up over the flat horizon. Then he drove to the town library and asked for microfilm from 1983. The name Ruth M. appeared in a thin obit column. Ruth Maybury died in a house fire. Her husband survived. Her body was recovered badly burned but identified by a wedding ring that melted to her finger. The article said she'd been buried at Calvary Hill Cemetery just outside of town. Daniel visited the grave. The headstone was there, weather-worn, chipped, half covered in leaves. But the date was the same as the toe tag, and taped crudely to the back of the stone, held down by what looked like surgical tape, was a note written in messy pen. "I wasn't finished," asked the man in the wall. He didn't know what that meant. Not then, but he couldn't stop thinking about it. The man in the wall. The next few nights were worse. The whispers grew bolder. They echoed when he walked past the cabinets. Some said things like, "It's cold," or "Tell my son I'm sorry." Others were darker, more confused. One voice begged to be let out. Another said it could see him through its eyelids. Sometimes they whispered his name, Daniel, in 100 unfamiliar tones. Childlike, shriveled, guttural. He called in sick. One night. But when he came back, he found a new entry in his logbook, written in handwriting that wasn't his. Drawer 9CJD, don't forget again. He opened it with shaking hands. No body. Just a dusty envelope. Inside was an old photograph, brown at the edges, of a man standing beside a wall that looked like the one in the basement. Stone, uneven, old dot and scribbled in pencil on the back. "He sees you too." Daniel called the sheriff's office, told them he thought someone had broken in, maybe was messing with the bodies. They sent a deputy, young guy named Curtis. He searched the place, found nothing out of order, said maybe Daniel needed some sleep. Offered to bring him coffee. That night, Curtis died. Single car crash. Swerved off Route 82 into a ditch. Witness said he looked like he was trying to claw his own eyes out before he hit the culvert. The whispers got louder after that. Not just in the morgue, but in the hallway, in the break room, even in the bathroom. Sometimes the lights flickered when they spoke. Sometimes the floor tiles bulged like something underneath was shifting, pressing upward. He tore apart drawer 9C, removed the lining, the bolts, the insulation. Behind the back panel was a cavity, a space no one had logged or noticed, and inside was a figure, mummified, walled in. Long dead, the man in the wall. His skull was caved in as if from a hammer. His fingers had scratched so long and hard it. The inside of the wall that bone showed through. Etched into the brick with blood and nail were dozens of names. Daniel checked the list. None were in the records. None had ever been booked, buried, or logged. Not officially. But every single one had appeared on a toe tag. And every single one whispered at night. He left Paris, Texas, 2 days later. Didn't quit. Didn't explain. Just didn't go back. Last anyone saw, he was heading west with no bags and a rosary wrapped so tight around his wrist the beads left marks. The morgue still runs. New guy now, young, confident, thinks the old. Rumors are nonsense, but they say every once in a while, when the wind cuts just right and the drawers rattle for no reason, you can still hear it. Is she here? Is Ruth here? He sees you too. He'd been ready to clock out. The meter on his phone app had already tallied up a decent shift 7 pickups, one trip out past Lockhart that ended in a no-show, and a couple of rowdy bar crawlers from San Marcos who tipped in crumpled fives. It was just past 2 a.m., and the streets of Lulling were dead quiet, just the way JT liked them. He was parked beside the Whataburger off Magnolia Avenue, nursing a half-warm cup of black coffee, the lid cracked to let the steam bleed out in the sticky July heat. The air smelled faintly of gasoline, asphalt, and meat grease, the perfume of the midnight road. He was about to swipe offline when the request popped up. Address: 1325 North Caldwell Street. Destination: Elm Grove Cemetery. The little blue pin blinked on the app's map like a pulse. JT stared at it, thumb hovering. Over reject. That address didn't sound right. Caldwell Street didn't run that far north. He'd driven Lulling's back roads for 5 years now. Knew them better than his own memory sometimes. But something about the address prickled the skin on his neck. Like static dot, then he saw the offered fare. $1.65 for a 10-minute ride. And a cash tip icon dot. He tapped accept. The route twisted through a part of town that had been mostly forgotten old clapboard houses swallowed by weeds. Boarded windows, the ghost of a Dairy Queen sign dangling crooked above a cracked parking lot. As he passed a dead stoplight blinking. Read over nothing, the radio fuzzed out for a moment. Not with static, but with something that sounded like breathing. JT tapped the console, thinking it was interference from one of the busted towers out by Startown. The breathing faded. He didn't think too hard about it. 1325 North Caldwell turned out to be a dirt lot where an old shotgun house used to stand. He remembered it from years back, when he'd picked up a lady there who always smelled like boiled onions and wore plastic curlers even in public. That house had burned down 4 years ago, and the city never rebuilt. But now, standing in the glow of his headlights, he swore he could see something else. Not the house, not exactly. Just the outline. The shape of it. And a shadow standing in the spot where the porch steps used to be. He blinked. The shadow was gone. He rubbed his eyes, adjusted the mirror, and was about to mark the ride as canceled when the back door opened with a soft click. JT froze. The cabin light flickered on, then off again. No wait. No sound of anyone settling into the back seat. He turned slowly, heart starting to thump against his ribs like something trying to escape. The back seat was empty, but the door had definitely opened. Good morning, he said, voice hoarse. You headed to Elm Grove? No response. He glanced at the dash cam. Its red light was blinking like normal, recording everything. He tried again. Look, I can take you, but I need some kind of confirmation. You got a name? This ride came through the app, but the profile was just initials JM. Still nothing. Then, a voice, soft, hollow, like it came from somewhere inside the car's bones, not the air dot double quotes, yes. Elm Grove? JT swallowed hard. The voice was neither male nor female. It had the cadence of someone used to being ignored, slow, careful. It made his skin crawl. All right, he said, trying to keep the tremor out of his voice. He shifted into drive. They rode in silence. The street lamps gave out halfway down the stretch of road leading to the cemetery. Just patches of yellow glow, and then nothing but moonlight and the distant hum of oil rigs. JT kept glancing at the rear view, not sure what he expected to see. The seat behind him looked untouched, but the air was wrong. It felt thick, cold, like someone had cracked a freezer door and let the chill seep out. He cranked the heat, but it didn't help. Halfway there, the voice spoke again. You've driven this way before. Yeah, a few times. You headed out for someone's funeral? A long pause. No, I'm going back. JJ forced a chuckle. Well, that's a first. Not many people going back to Elm Grove at 2 in the morning. The voice didn't answer. Instead, something scratched lightly on the inside of the rear passenger window. He looked over. Nothing was there. Just condensation on the glass. He kept driving. The gate to Elm Grove was cracked open when he arrived. He hadn't even noticed until his headlights swept across the rusted chain link and picked out the open gap, wide enough for a car to pass through. No lights, of course. Just rows of leaning headstones and a huge live oak that split the graveyard like an old scar. He pulled up beside the tree, gravel crunching under his tires. The voice spoke again. "This is the place." JT turned around slowly. "You want me to wait?" There was no one in the back seat. Just the smell of old rain and something else. Dirt, not fresh earth. Something that had been buried a long, long time. He got out, walked around. Opened the rear door. Empty. Not even an indentation on the leather seat. Then he heard it. A whisper. His name, JT. It came from just beyond the tree. He stepped closer, keys clenched in his fist like he could beat a ghost with metal. The cemetery stretched out around him, dark and unmoving. But something shifted, a shape between the headstones. A figure walking, slow and unsteady, wearing what looked like a driver's cap. He called out, "Hey!" The figure didn't stop. Just walked deeper into the rows until it vanished. He got back in the car and slammed the door. Put it in reverse. Hauled back down the gravel and out the gate like the devil was chasing him. Back at home. After he'd parked and double-locked every door, he checked the dashcam footage. It showed him pulling up to the dirt lot. Showed the back door opening. Showed him talking, lips moving, even laughing nervously once or twice. But the back seat was empty. The whole ride, even stranger, he saw something else in the video. Around the 2:29 mark. The window behind his driver's seat showed a reflection. Not of the empty seat, but of a face. Sunken, pale, eyes black as oil. The footage glitched out. Right AFTERJT deleted the app that night. He never picked up another fare again, but sometimes, even now, if he's driving alone past midnight, his rearview mirror fogs up, and a faint voice from nowhere whispers, "You've driven this way before." The new kid's name was Eddie, though the manager kept calling him Reggie the first few days, and nobody bothered to correct him. He was 17, just out of high school for the summer, and had snagged the overnight restocking shift at the HEB in Edna, mostly because his cousin worked there and said the pay wasn't bad if you could put up with the freezer burn and the boredom. Eddie didn't mind the cold. What bothered him was the silence. There was a kind of stillness to grocery stores after hours, an unnatural hush, like the building itself was holding its breath. You wouldn't think 4 walls and a roof could feel haunted, but something about all that fluorescent light and shrink-wrapped food under lock and key made Eddie feel like he was being watched. And that frozen foods aisle was the worst. It stretched from the ice cream coolers in the back all the way up to the glass door coffins where they kept the fish sticks and Salisbury steaks. No windows, no clocks. Just that low electric hum from the coolers and the occasional click of one of the auto defrost cycles. The air smelled like bleach and freezer burn, and the floors were so clean they reflected the overhead lights like a mirror made of plastic. Eddie's job was simple. Wipe down the shelves, rotate the stock, and make sure the old stuff didn't sit too long. Sometimes he found expired TV dinners from the early 2000s tucked behind new stock, like some previous employee had just gotten tired of the rules and started burying the problem. Other times, he'd swear the items moved on their own. A lean cuisine shifted slightly left. A pack of Eggo waffles turned backward. Always little things. Easy to blame on tired eyes and dragging feet. The weirdness started on a Tuesday night or Wednesday morning, depending on how you looked at it. It was about 2:45 a.m. He was almost done with aisle 14 when the lights flickered. Not a full blackout, just a blink, like the place had blinked at him. He froze with one hand deep inside a box of frozen peas, waiting. The lights steadied. He told himself it was just the power grid. Edna wasn't exactly New York City. Rolling brownouts were common, especially when half the county ran off the same substation. Still, something about that flicker made his skin crawl. He turned, looked back toward the deli section, and caught movement, quick and shadowy. Just beyond the end-cap display of frozen pizzas. He called out, thinking maybe one of the managers had come back in, or maybe it was Shane, the night supervisor who spent more time hiding in the break room than working. But no one answered. Eddie walked to the end of the aisle and peered around the corner. Nothing. He shook it off and went back to cleaning. 15 minutes later, the cart started moving. He heard the sound, first wheel squeaking, metal rattling. It came from the front of the store, near the entryway. But there was no one on shift except him. He hadn't even seen the night janitor. The automatic doors were locked and bolted by 11 o'clock. Still, the carts moved. Not fast, not wild. Just slowly rolling across the linoleum as if someone was gently pushing them. He could hear the rubber wheels skidding against the floor, their hollow clang bouncing off the refrigerated cases. Eddie stepped out into the main aisle and stared at them. 4 carts, perfectly aligned, coming down the center of the store in a straight row. He backed up instinctively, heart climbing into his throat. The cart stopped, dead still. He didn't run. Not yet. Instead, he walked slowly down the side aisle toward the back where the employee lockers were. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe Shane thought it'd be funny to mess with the new guy. But the silence made it feel different, heavy. As he reached the stockroom door, he heard a new sound, one that made his stomach clench. Clink. Shuffle. Slide. It was coming from aisle 14. The frozen foods. Eddie turned the corner and nearly dropped his mop bucket. Boxes were being placed on the shelves, not floating or flying, not all at once. One by one, a hand, pale, bony, and wrinkled, reached out from behind a half-open freezer door and placed a box of fish fillets neatly beside the others. Then it retreated, and another item appeared, corn dogs. Then lasagna. No sound, no voice, just the gentle sound of plastic packaging brushing against metal shelves. Eddie whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe just his own name, but it came out like a croak. He approached slowly, each footstep squeaking against the floor. He didn't want to see what was behind the freezer door. He didn't want to look, but he had to. He reached out and pulled it wide open. Nothing. Just stacked frozen dinners and a cold wave of air that smelled like old meat. No one inside. No false wall. He backed away, eyes darting to the other end of the aisle, where the cart still sat. Then, one of the overhead speakers crackled to life. It hadn't worked in years. No music ever played. But tonight, it whispered, "Clean up. Aisle 14." Except the voice wasn't synthetic. It was human. Old. Gravelly. It sounded like a man trying to speak through a throat half full of dirt. Eddie ran. He made it halfway to the back before the power cut out entirely. No emergency lights. No backup generator. Just total blackness, except for the pale blue light leaking from the freezer section behind him. That's when he noticed something else, something worse. All the product on aisle 14 was gone. Every shelf was empty, but he hadn't removed a thing. In fact, when he'd looked away just moments ago, the shelves had been full again. He turned back toward the carts. They were gone. So was the sound. The building felt sealed, like a tomb. His phone didn't have signal. He tried the employee entrance. It didn't budge. The door to the stockroom? Locked? He circled the store for 20 minutes, calling out, banging on doors, throwing his weight against emergency exits. Nothing gave Dot at 3:27 a.m. The lights came back on Dot, so did the music. A cheerful jingle started playing over the speakers, something about saving more and living better. But the pitch was wrong. Too slow. Distorted. Eddie stood in front of the ice cream section, breathing hard, trying not to cry. And then he saw the reflection. In the freezer door. A man stood behind him. Tall, thin, wearing the old Hebe uniform, the one they hadn't used since the 80s. His name tag was covered in frost, but Eddie could read just enough to make out the letters, R-A-Y. The man didn't move, didn't blink. Just stared. Eddie turned around. No one there, but the door was open now, and inside, between bags of frozen okra and pizza rolls, there was a space big enough for someone to climb in. Something compelled him. He didn't want to, but his body moved anyway. He stepped forward, leaned into the cold, reached out, and the door slammed shut behind him. They found Eddie 2 days later, curled into the fetal position inside freezer 14B. His clothes were soaked. His lips were blue, but what got the paramedics whispering was this. Every shelf in the frozen foods aisle had been neatly restocked, perfectly rotated, alphabetized. And every item bore the same expiration date, July 19, 1987. The same night Raymond Ortiz, the Night Stalker, vanished during a power outage. He'd been replacing the old stock when he slipped on a puddle and hit his head. They never found the body. Until now. Underneath the frozen pizza Eddie had curled around, investigators found a femur, a human femur, wrapped in plastic. With a faded label that read, "Employee discount. Do not remove." It started the way most shifts did, quiet, too quiet for comfort. Melissa was 6 months into her contract at the Tri-County Rural Health Clinic just outside Eagle Lake, Texas. Midnight shift, all by herself, nothing but the buzz of fluorescence and the occasional tick from the blood pressure monitors. Out here, you learn to live with the silence. You had to. Otherwise, the quiet would eat at you like rust on steel. Still, something about that night felt off before the first patient even limped through the door. She made the coffee like she always did. Same dented aluminum percolator they'd had since the 70s, perched crooked on a stained side table in the nurse's station. The wiring in the wall behind it had been flagged for replacement years ago, but nothing ever got done about it. Clinic was too broke for upgrades, too far off the radar for inspections. She'd started the pot around midnight, mostly out of habit. No one else was there. No doctor on call. No patient scheduled. But the air was heavy, almost humid, and she was starting to nod off over her charting. A bitter cup of overcooked coffee usually did the trick. She poured her first mug around 12:10. It tasted like burned wood chips and wet iron, but that was normal. What wasn't normal was how the smell lingered stronger than usual. Thick. She figured maybe the heating coil was finally giving out, overheating the whole pot. Still, it wasn't worth fussing over. She had half a shift to go, and the idea of driving 40 miles back to her trailer in the dark wasn't exactly motivating. By 1 a.m., she noticed the pot hadn't budged. No steam curling from the top, no hiss of it finishing the cycle. Just a low, slow gurgle like it was stuck in mid-brew. She checked the pot. The glass was hot, too hot. The kind of hot that should have boiled off all the water an hour ago. But when she poured a second cup, it was full, overfull, even. She frowned. The thing had to be broken. Maybe the reservoir kept refilling from somewhere. She unplugged it, watching as the coil inside slowly dimmed. That should have been that. Except it wasn't. At 1:47, she passed the break room again and froze. That pot was still gurgling. Still brewing. Unplugged. She stared at it. The red light on the side flickered even though the cord hung limp inches from the socket. She watched it for a good minute, that strange, pulsing light, almost like it was syncing up with her heart rate. Then came the smell again, but this time it wasn't burnt coffee. It was sweet, rotten sweet, like syrup poured over roadkill left to cook in the July sun. She didn't know why, but the smell pulled her in, almost like it was inviting her. She didn't want to pour another cup. She had to. That third mug was different. The color was wrong. Not just dark. Black. Pitch black. Black like oil slicks. Under dead cows. She lifted the mug to her nose, and it didn't smell like coffee anymore. It smelled like damp earth, like something had been buried deep and was leaking up through the ground. And as she held it hand trembling, lips barely parting, she swore she heard something. A whisper. Not words, exactly, more like the way a thought might hum at the edge of language. Like a voice remembering a name it shouldn't know. She threw the mug into the sink and ran water over the pot. The sink coughed and sputtered, spitting out thick brown sludge that clung to the basin. The water wouldn't wash it away. It just smeared. That's when she heard it, clear as day. Melissa. The voice came from the break room. No one else was in the building. She backed into the hallway, hand over her chest like she could press the sound out of her ears. The lights above her flickered once, then again. Then they stayed steady, but the walls felt closer now, the floor colder. She returned to the nurse's station and tried to distract herself with paperwork. But every few minutes, the coffee pot gurgled again. And each time, it sounded less like boiling water and more like something alive, breathing. Wet. By 3:12. She had unplugged the damn thing 4 separate times. Each time, it kept brewing. Each time, the pot filled to the brim. She tried dumping it down the toilet. It refilled. She tried leaving it outside. When she returned, it was back on the table, steaming, full, waiting. That was when the whispers started calling her by her full name. Melissa Ann Fielder? She froze mid-step. Her badge didn't have her middle name. Nobody here knew it. She never said it. No one called her that since her mother passed. It said it again. Melissa Ann? That time it came from the hallway. But the hallway was empty. Nothing but wheelchairs and supply carts. The sound was coming from the intercom, but that system had been broken since February. By 3:40 a.m. She gave up trying to rationalize it. She grabbed her keys and bag, ready to walk out. Screw the clinic. Let it burn. Let someone else clock in come morning. But when she got to the main doors, they wouldn't open. The security lock buzzed, red light flashing, like someone had tripped it from inside. She tried the back door. Same thing. She even tried the fire exit near the exam rooms. Nothing. No power. No give. Trap. And then the coffee smell flooded the whole building. Thick and sharp like blood and mold. It oozed through the vents, wrapped around her neck like a warm, wet scarf. She choked, coughing into her sleeve. When she looked back down the hallway, the break room light was off, but the pot still glowed. Red, pulsing. She had to go back. She didn't want to, but something made her. Not fear, not even curiosity. Obligation, like the pot had become a patient. And she was the only one on duty. The closer she got, the heavier her steps felt. Her arms trembled like she'd been carrying something too long. The hallway stretched. The walls breathed in slow pulses. When she reached the door, it was open. The coffee pot sat in the middle of the floor now, not on the table. A puddle spread beneath it, thick and dark and viscous. The glass was cracked. Not shattered, just cracked, like a web had formed on its face, and it was speaking again. But this time, it wasn't just whispering her name. It was reciting things. 6 pounds, 7 ounces. Born in the backseat of a Ford Fairlane, May 14, 1992. Your mother screamed until she saw your eyes. She collapsed against the doorframe, her vision blurred. Those weren't just words. Those were her memories. Ones she hadn't heard since her mother's funeral. Ones no one else could know. Then came the final whisper, soft and slow, dripping with syrupy static. Drink? She ran. Didn't know where, didn't care. She just ran. Into the supply closet, locking the door behind her, knees to chest. Heart pounding so loud it drowned out the gurgling. She covered her ears. Rocked back and forth. Prayed like she hadn't since she was 8. But the smell came anyway. The light under the door flickered, and when she finally passed out, head slumped against the mop bucket, she dreamt of boiling blood and endless cups that drained themselves. Into her mouth, she woke to daylight. The clinic was silent. Normal. The pot was gone. Just gone. No trace. Not even a stain on the floor. She left that morning and never came back. Quit by phone. Moved 3 counties over. She never brewed coffee again. Couldn't even walk past the aisle in the grocery store without shaking. But last week she got a package in the mail. No return address. No note inside. Just a familiar dented aluminum percolator wrapped in brown paper, and when she touched it, the glass was still warm. The dispatch center in Presidio County was usually quiet after midnight, especially out near Marfa, where the night stretched long and hollow and the silence had weight. Susan Baird had been working the graveyard shift for over a decade, her headset now practically molded to the shape of her skull, her eyes used to scanning blank screens and blinking red dots that never blinked fast enough. She liked the quiet mostly. No one breathing down her neck, no small-town gossip, no chaos. Just the hum of old equipment and the low wind that always seemed to slip through the cracked siding of the building no matter how tight they sealed. The place. That night the sky was clear but starless. The kind of black you only got in a desert, like the world had turned off the lights and forgot to flip them back on. She sipped her cold coffee, stale and bitter, listening to the rhythmic click of her pen tapping the console desk. The phones had been silent since 10:30. Even the sheriff was dozing in his cruiser somewhere between Ranch Road 2810 and Sleep. Then the red light blinked. Not just a blip, but a rapid-fire pulse, flashing like it was angry. The console's ancient. Speaker crackled to life before she even pressed the button. Marfa dispatch, what's your emergency? She said automatically, voice steady from muscle memory. There was silence on the other end. A scratch of static, like something dragging across a dusty vinyl record. Then, just as she was about to hang up, a voice broke through. Help me. Please. Female, young, shaking like a leaf in wind. Ma'am, you're breaking up. Can you repeat that? What's your location? The line hissed, then a pause. Grain. Mill, off Highway 90. They're in the walls. I can't get out. Susan froze. Her stomach twisted in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee. Did you say the grain mill? Ma'am, that building's been gone for years. Torn down in '07. Are you hurt? The voice sobbed, gasping like she'd been running. I'm bleeding. They cut me. Please, don't let them in again. Who? Ma'am, who hurt? You? But the line popped and went dead. Susan blinked at the console, heart suddenly hammering against her ribs. She checked the number on screen. Just zeros. Like it never existed. She tapped a few keys and pulled up the call log. No ID. No coordinates. Nothing. The call hadn't been routed through any towers. Technically, it shouldn't have happened at all. Still, she logged it. Habit, duty. And then, because something deeper than professionalism was gnawing at her, She keyed up Deputy Torres on the radio. "Carlos, you copy?" A sleepy grunt answered back. "Yeah, what's up?" "You near the old mill site?" "Sorta. I'm maybe 5 miles east of it." "Why? Mind checking it out?" "I just got a call ... strange one. Girl said she was bleeding and trapped there. Claimed someone cut her, but the building ain't been there in years." "Yeah, I remember. Whole thing burned before they leveled it. I'll head over." She thanked him, but the call lingered. That voice had sounded too real. Not like the prank crap the kids sometimes pulled. Too desperate. Susan stood, stretching the stiffness out of her back, and stepped into a way. The break room. The hallway was narrow, painted in flaking eggshell white, and the flickering ceiling light buzzed louder than usual. She poured herself another cup from the same pot that had been sitting there since 8 p.m., then froze mid-sip from her headset, which she'd left on the console. A voice whispered, "Susan ... Her name barely audible, drawn out like a breath. On glass dot, she hurried back in, heart thudding. No incoming call. No blinking light. She pulled off the headset and stared at it, like it might bite her. Then the phone rang again. This time she hesitated before answering. When she finally did, the same static greeted her. "Susan ... Help me ... You have to come." "Who? Is this?" "You know me," the voice cried, not in accusation but in fact. Susan's skin crawled. Something about the voice was off. It echoed strangely, like a reflection of her own tone, higher, scared, but definitely hers. "I'm tracing this call," she said, even though she couldn't. "If this is some kind of sick..." "There. Coming," the voice sobbed. "They live under the floor now." "You let them out?" Then silence. She slammed the phone down. 10 minutes passed before Torres called back. "Yeah, so, you etch." "Susan," he said, voice low and tense. "You got that call from the mill site?" "Yeah." "Well, there ain't no mill, obviously. But there's something here. You remember that storm last year? Washed out part of the ground behind the fence? I drove around the edge of it. There's a hatch back here. Like industrial steel, mostly buried, covered in soot." Susan swallowed. "Hard. You go in?" "Nah, locked tight, rusted shut. But I swear, I heard something. Not like animals, like breathing. Lots of it. You want me to radio for backup?" Susan didn't answer right away, because something was clawing its way out of her memory. A night, in 2006, her first year on the job, when she got another strange call from a girl who kept saying, "They're coming through the cracks," a girl no one ever found. A call that never logged. She'd told herself for years it was a prank. A ghost in the machine, and now it was back. "No," she said finally. "Don't open anything. Just get out of there." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Torres said, "Copy," but he didn't sound sure. Susan stayed up the rest of the night, headset off, hands flat on the desk, listening to the hum of dead air. She went home at dawn. Tried not to think about the third call that came through right before shift change. The one where the voice said, "You shouldn't have buried us." The city tore up the old mill site 3 days later when Torres filed an unofficial report. No press, no announcement. Just a crew of guys with no local plates and unmarked trucks, who worked all night and were gone before sunrise. Susan kept working at dispatch for another 5 years, but the phones never felt the same. She bought a burner phone and kept it in a drawer, turned off and sealed in plastic, because every once in a while, when the wind picks up from the west and the sky goes colorless just after dark, she hears a crackle in the wall by her desk and something that sounds like her own voice breathing, "Help me." And one night, not long before she finally quit, the burner rang. Just once. No ID. She didn't answer, But the voicemail was still there. Only static. And then a whisper. Come back, we're not done talking. The lights started around 1:42 a.m., according to the security tape, but Daryl Evans, who'd been the night watchman at the Tulia Wash and Dry for over 17 years, didn't need time-stamped footage to tell you what time they came. He remembered. Every second. Because after that night, time didn't move quite right anymore. His routine had always been the same. He'd sweep the parking lot, check the alley between the laundromat and the empty feed store next door, lock the back fence. Gate. And then sit in the utility closet with his little radio and a thermos of coffee that usually lasted until 4 o'clock. He liked the graveyard shift. It was quiet. Nobody gave him grief, and the worst thing he had to deal with was an occasional drunk pissing behind the dryers. That night was cold, not winter cold, but the kind of damp Texas chill that sinks into your knees if you're standing on concrete too long. The street lamp outside flickered now and then like always, and his breath fogged the air when he exhaled. He was halfway through his first lap around the building when he saw them faint flashes behind the building, just past the row of dented old dryers that backed up against the back wall. At first, he figured it was just some kids with flashlights, maybe doing a TikTok thing or trying to scare each other. That happened sometimes. Small towns bred boredom. But when he rounded the back and flipped his mag light on, he didn't see anyone. Just the glow. Pale, yellow-white. It wasn't shining from any one spot. It shimmered like heat off a road. It pulsed slowly, too slow and steady to be a flashlight. Too solid to be a reflection. He stood there staring at it, mouth half open, until it just blinked out, like someone hit a switch inside the air. He walked forward, slowly, and peered between the slats of the vent and the back wall. The dryers were silent inside. Nobody there. Just laundry in various stages of tumbling. He went back to the front, checked the doors. They were locked, as they should be. No one had been inside for the past 2 hours. He checked the logs. Last customer was a woman with 2 kids who came in around 9 and left before 10. No new entries. No door triggers. Nothing. Still, something about the lights made the back of his neck itch. He went to the side window and cupped his hands around his face to look in. The place was spotless, clean as always. He was about to turn away when he saw one of the dryers begin to spin, just one, on the far end. Number 12, it started slowly, then picked up speed. He walked around the side, back to the locked glass door. Still locked, still secure, but now another dryer had joined. Number 14, then number 11. They spun in rhythm, counterclockwise. The others remained still. No sound of coins dropping. No hum from the machines. Just motion. Silent. Coordinated. That was when he heard the click. Not a loud sound. Just the tiny click of a door latch. He turned and tried the handle. The door swung inward easily, though he was sure he'd locked it earlier. He stepped inside and was immediately struck by the silence. The kind of silence that has weight to it. The only sound came from those dryers, 3 of them spinning softly now, as if underwater. No heat, no hum. Just the smooth, deliberate turn of drums that should have been dead. Daryl took a few steps forward and froze. The machines weren't just spinning. They were all full, not with clothes though. The contents were dark, wet-looking, heavy like soaked denim. But there were no clothes scheduled for cleaning, no overnight service at all. One of the dryer doors popped open mid-spin and slammed. Shut again, like it was gasping. The lights overhead flickered. That was when he noticed the smell. Metallic, sweet. Familiar in a way that made his stomach shift. He moved closer, squinting. The glass on dryer 12 was fogged over with something that looked like steam, but the room was cold. He reached out, wiped the glass with his sleeve. What he saw didn't make sense. Inside wasn't fabric. It looked like hair. Human hair, tangled and matted against the glass. Brown, maybe dark red. The drum rolled again and the hair moved, revealing something underneath, something pale and smooth and unmistakably flesh. A face, eyes closed, mouth slack, spinning gently with the drum. Darryl stumbled back. He looked toward the door, but it had clicked shut behind him. The lock light was red. He bolted for the keypad, punched in the override. Nothing. Dead. His radio let out a soft burst of static, then went quiet. The lights dimmed until only the glow of the dryer windows lit the room. Behind him, the other machines began to spin. Slowly, all of them, one by one. Each dryer window showed something different: an arm, a foot, a soaked shirt stuck to ribs. No one he recognized, and yet something in his bones told him these weren't strangers. They were echoes, or warnings. He banged on the door with the butt of his flashlight, yelling. No sound left his mouth. His throat moved, but no noise followed. He turned. One of the dryer doors had opened again. This time, it stayed open. The drum slowed. Inside, a soaked pair of jeans and a heavy flannel shirt curled around something that glinted. His own keyring. The one he'd clipped to his belt. It was gone. He stared at the open dryer. A whisper reached him. Not through ears, but through skin, like the cold was speaking directly into his spine. It said his name, again. Then a second voice joined. This one was his own, Darryl. It came from Dryer 14, his voice unmistakable, flat and lifeless. Let me out. He backed away. Slipped on something slick on the floor. Landed hard. Looked down. Water, no blood. A thin trail of it snaked from under the machines toward the drain in the center of the room. It bubbled faintly, as if something was breathing down there. Something big. The machine spun faster. Louder now. A rhythmic pounding thudded from inside them, in sync with his own heartbeat. Or maybe not his. Maybe something else's. The air got thick. Too thick. Hard to breathe. His vision tunneled. And then everything stopped. Just stopped. Every dryer froze mid-spin. The lights blinked back to life. The door lock clicked open with a soft chime. His radio buzzed again, cheerful, like nothing had ever gone wrong. Darryl didn't remember leaving the laundromat. But he woke up the next morning on the bench outside, hands shaking, face wet. The morning sun was bright. People bustled around the parking lot. The laundromat hummed with normal life. The cameras? Wiped. The logs? Corrupted. He told the manager. The guy just stared at him, told him maybe he needed a break, maybe he'd been working too many nights. He quit the next day. But he didn't leave Tulia. Couldn't. Something held him there. Not guilt, not curiosity, something worse. A pull. Because some nights only the cold, dead ones when no one else is around, he sees them again. The lights. Flickering behind the dryers, floating, pulsing, like they're waiting for someone. For him, he doesn't go near anymore. But deep down, he knows it's not over. Not by a long shot. Because every time he passes the laundromat, dryer 14 spins just once when he looks. And if he listens real close, he still hears his own voice whispering through the glass from the other side of the cycle. Let me out. The diner sat on the edge of Alice, Texas, just before Route 44 faded into the thick brush and bone-dry gravel stretches that made up the no-man's land between small towns. People called it Lucky's, though no one remembered who Lucky had been or if he'd ever even existed. The paint was peeling, the neon buzzed more than it glowed, and the Formica countertops inside bore the etched names of kids now long dead or locked up. It stayed open late because truckers needed coffee and locals needed a place to pretend they weren't alone. Raymond cooked the graveyard shift. 62, grizzled, balding, and quiet as a shadow. He'd worked at Lucky's since before his wife left him and his son stopped calling. Kept his head down, served up over-medium eggs and smothered hash, and didn't ask questions. Folks liked that about him. The waitresses, when they had any, came and went, but Raymond was constant. The kind of man you'd forget was in the room. Until he cleared his throat. That night had started quiet. Too quiet. It was the dead heat of August, air humming with crickets and tension. A summer storm had threatened all day but never delivered, and now the wind carried the dry, electric scent of dust. Only one customer had come in after midnight, a guy in a reflective vest who sat at the corner booth and stared into a cup of black coffee like it held answers. He didn't order food, didn't speak, just left a tip that was 2 quarters stacked neatly on the table. Around 3:10 a.m., Raymond finished cleaning the griddle, wiped his hands, and opened the walk-in cooler to grab another tray of bacon for the morning prep. He stepped inside, reached for the metal shelf, and froze. There, in the far corner, was a girl, maybe 10, maybe 12. Barefoot, filthy white nightgown, hair tangled like it hadn't been brushed in weeks. Her eyes were too wide for her face, pupils swallowed in black. She didn't scream, didn't move. Just stood shivering in the dark, arms hugging herself. Raymond's breath caught in his throat. "Mia?" he said, stepping back a little, the cold already biting into his hands. "Estás bien? You okay?" No answer. Just those big eyes. He left the door open and backed out slowly, fingers fumbling toward the landline on the wall. His brain felt full of static, trying to find the right steps. Call the cops, keep her warm. Maybe she was a runaway or part of some twisted trafficking thing. God knows what happened in South Texas at night. He called 911 and stumbled over his words until the dispatcher calmed him down and promised someone would be there in under 10 minutes. He hung up, took a blanket from the break room, and returned to the cooler. She was gone. The shelf where she'd stood was empty except for frost-lined milk crates and a wilted head of lettuce. No footprints, no condensation. Just the hush of the fan spinning overhead. He stood there a full minute, waiting, as if she might reappear, as if he'd imagined her, and maybe he had. Maybe sleep deprivation and loneliness had finally caught up with him. But then he looked at the inside of the door. It had swung closed. There was a palm print on the glass. Small, smized, child-sized. When the sheriff's deputies showed up, they were polite enough. Took his statement, walked the kitchen, checked the locks on the back door. Didn't find any sign of forced entry. No missing persons report for a girl matching that description in Alice or the surrounding counties. But they humored him when he asked to see the surveillance tapes. The diner had 4 old dome cameras, black and white, grainy as hell, set up years ago after a string of break-ins. One of them pointed into the kitchen. Another aimed directly at the cooler door. Raymond and the 2 officers sat in the back booth while the deputy fast-forwarded through the feed on a laptop. There Raymond was, cleaning the grill. There he was, heading to the cooler. He disappeared inside, and then the cooler door creaked open. Slowly, all by itself. He stepped out with the blanket in his hands, confused and trembling. The feed showed no one else. No girl. No feet. No palm prints. Just Raymond and the walk-in door swinging open on its own. That night changed him. He stayed quiet about it for weeks, but word got around. It always does in towns like Alice. The waitress on the morning shift, Gloria, said he started taking longer breaks. Kept checking the cooler every hour like he expected her to be there. One of the regulars claimed he caught Raymond whispering to himself in the kitchen. Another said he saw him leave a juice box and a granola bar inside the cooler, like an offering. A month later, the new security guy pulled Raymond aside. "You ever watch the feed from 2 nights ago?" he asked. Raymond shook his head. "Why?" The guy didn't answer, just handed over a USB drive. Raymond waited until his shift ended, went home, locked the door, and popped the USB into the old laptop he kept on the kitchen table. The video was from 2:43 a.m. The kitchen was still dimly lit. Raymond wasn't in the frame. The cooler door was closed, and then it opened again. This time the girl stepped out. Same tangled hair, same nightgown. She walked straight into the kitchen, barefoot, slow. Looked around like she remembered it. Her hands reached out to touch the old fryer, the spice rack, the row of knives hanging neatly on their magnet strip. Then she turned to the camera and smiled. Raymond felt ice crawl under his skin. Not because of her smile, but because he recognized it. That half-crooked, teeth-too-small grin. He had a photo of that smile in a drawer, wrapped in tissue with a lock of hair. His daughter, Maria. She'd drowned 13 years ago in a retention pond behind the old trailer park on the east side of town. It took them days to find her body. The water had turned her pale, bloated, unrecognizable except for her teeth. The dental records had been conclusive. He'd never told anyone, not really. Said she died in an accident, that she fell in while chasing a frog. But she'd been barefoot when they found her, and the mud around the pond had been full of prints. Small bear, not hers. And the sheriff said the case was closed, but Raymond knew something had taken her. Something that watched, that waited. He hadn't seen it since until now, that night. After he watched the footage, he sat up in bed until sunrise, holding the photo of Maria, wondering if it had been her, wondering if it had ever really been over. A week later, Gloria found the diner locked from the inside. The lights were on. The grill was cold. Raymond's apron hung neatly from its hook. No one has seen him since police came. They found a note on the counter. One sentence. She's still cold. I'm keeping her warm. Inside the walk-in cooler, they found 2 sets of footprints in the frost. One large, one small. And on the metal shelf, a juice box, half empty. It was still cold. San Saba's only FM station was more of a leftover than a landmark. 96.1, the Horn didn't get many listeners anymore. Not since streaming and podcasts took over, and the old antenna on County Road 132 leaned like a drunk preacher. The building wasn't much better. A concrete bunker built back in the 70s, tucked behind a line of scrub oaks and mesquite. It sat under a leaning tower blinking red through the night like a tired eye. Inside, it smelled like old smoke, burnt coffee, and something else beneath the surface, something moldy, but too dry to rot properly. It was the kind of place where time got stuck like flies in an old jar of syrup. Eddie Trammell had been doing the overnight shift for almost 6 years, midnight to 6. No live calls, no guests, no co-host. Just him, the board, a computer that played automated country and soft rock, and a mic he'd talk into now and then for weather or some half-assed joke that only truckers or insomniacs might hear on their way through town. He wasn't bitter about it, not exactly. He used to want more, a syndicated show maybe, or a gig in Austin, but life had a way of stripping your ambition, until you didn't even feel the cold wind where your hope used to be. Now he just brought his thermos, set his bag down, and let the night pass like a steady trickle of molasses. That night started like any other. He parked his truck under the busted floodlight that buzzed but didn't shine, walked past the wild thicket behind the studio where he'd seen a coyote once, and unlocked the door with a key that always stuck halfway in. He made his usual loop. Check the board, warm up the mic, sip coffee, cue the playlist. The weather was mild. No storms. Just that dry, dusty cold that settled over hill country in November like an old wool blanket out around 1:18 a.m. The static started. Not loud, just a soft hiss over the music, like the sound of someone breathing through their teeth. At first, Eddie thought it was a blown cable or maybe the preamp E acting up again. The studio was a Frankenstein of salvaged tech, some dating. Back to Regan's first term. He muted the channel, replugged the O, and waited. The hiss stopped, but when he unmuted the music, the static came back louder now and deeper, like it had weight. It wasn't white noise, not exactly. There was a shape to it. It pulsed faintly, like a breath, a rhythm, inhale, exhale. Eddie leaned in closer to the board, watching the levels bounce softly even when nothing played. Probably wind, he muttered to himself, though the tower seal was tight and the wind had died down hours ago. Still, he flipped to the emergency weather feed just to check. Nothing. He stood and looked out the window past the soundproof blinds out toward the scrubland and the blinking tower light beyond. Everything looked normal, quiet, dead. Then, songs started playing. He hadn't cued it. He was sure of that. The board was set to automated loop, just a carousel of soft country, smooth rock, and local PSAs. But this wasn't in the rotation. It was scratchy, like it had been pulled from an old 8-track or vinyl warped from sitting in the sun. The tune was slow, bluesy, with a slide guitar and a voice that croaked like it had swallowed too much smoke. Eddie knew that song. It took him a moment, but it clicked in his gut before it hit his brain. It was Dry Season Woman, Apana, local single that never made it past a few stations in the 80s. The guy who recorded it was named J.T. Rusk, old outlaw type. Played at the Broken Spur back when Eddie was a teenager. The man died in 1986, drunk, and face down in the Llano River, or so folks said, but that wasn't the part that scared Eddie. It was that he remembered playing that song exactly once. 40 years ago, he'd only been 16, sneaking into the studio after hours when his uncle manned the night shift. Eddie had gone up to the record room, dragged out an old crate labeled Local Cuts, and thrown it on the deck out of curiosity. It wasn't even in circulation anymore. He remembered the way the voice cracked halfway through, the way the guitar fell out of tune during the bridge, but now it played like it had never been gone. And underneath the music, the static was back. Only this time, it wasn't breathing. It was whispering. He turned up the monitor. The whisper wasn't clear, not at first. It faded in and out, weaving under the slide guitar and the crackling vinyl hiss. Then it started forming words. "Can you hear me?" He backed away from the board. The song kept playing, but now it had gone wrong. Notes stretched too long. The guitar sounded like it was bending, warping, shrieking in the low ends. The voice, JT's voice, slurred and stuttered like a vinyl, melting on the spindle. Then it stopped. Dead silence. The board went dark. Every LED blinked off. Even the red on-air light above the booth door cut out. Eddie stared into the sudden quiet, like it was a hole in the world. Then his voice came through the speakers. Not a voice like his actual voice. Panicked. "Hi. Is someone there?" It said. Then a pause. "Jesus Christ. I don't know where I am." Eddie stumbled back, heart racing. He hadn't recorded anything, hadn't spoken, hadn't triggered playback. But the voice kept talking. His voice. "Something's wrong. I can't see. I don't think I'm alone in here. Please, if you're listening." The feed cut. The board came back to life. Music resumed. Nothing unusual now, just John Denver crooning "Take Me Home, Country Roads" as if nothing had happened. The static was gone. No breathing. No whispers. Eddie stood frozen, sweat prickling his scalp. He reached for the emergency line, The old red phone mounted near the fire extinguisher. Picked it up, no dial tone. Dead line. He grabbed his keys, bolted the booth, and ran out into the lot. His truck's headlights flicked on the moment he approached, as if welcoming him back. He jumped in, started the engine, and didn't stop driving until he reached the sheriff's station across town. But when he told them, the deputy just looked at him sideways and called dispatch to do a wellness check. When they arrived at the studio 20 minutes later, the building was dark and empty. And here's the part no one can explain. When they played back the security footage, the booth cam showed Eddie sitting at the board. But he never moved. For 6 straight hours, he just sat there, unmoving, staring into the dark. No records played, no voice, no static. Just 6 hours of silence and a man who looked like he'd already left his body. But Eddie swore he ran. He swore he left. They found his truck still idling out back, driver's door open, his keys dangling from the ignition. No one knows how he got home that morning. And every now and then, usually in the dead hours between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m., someone driving past 96.1 says they hear a strange signal, a song that doesn't show on any playlist. One with a warped guitar and a cracked voice that pleads over and over, "Can you hear me?" And buried at the end of it, if you listen real close, you can hear a voice raspy, terrified screaming for help. Eddie's voice, begging, from somewhere no one can reach. They tore the place down in 2007, that old Westmart out on Highway 86. Where it curved just outside of Dimmitt. Some say the reason was black mold. Others whispered about bad wiring or old asbestos. But the ones who were there in the last year of its life, the night stalkers, the meat clerks, the janitor who refused to talk after February, they knew better. They didn't tell outsiders, not exactly. But late at night over beers or black coffee, they'd slip and say something like, "You ever feel a building breathe?" And the table would go quiet. It started small, the way these things always do. Bethany Grier was the first to say something back in July of '06. She worked Register 3, the one near the red box that never quite worked. Sod, she felt the wall behind her flex when she was counting her till. Not shake like from a truck passing, not rumble like thunder. Flex like muscle. Nobody listened. Not at first. Then Ricky Lopez, who cleaned the floors on night shift, said the mop water kept rippling, even when the air was dead still. Not from the cooler fans or the AC vent. Said it was like something exhaled from the tiles. Like breath warmed from underground. But the story really took off the night the freezer alarm started going off at 3:07 a.m. sharp, every night. Meat manager Harold Wiggins thought it was a bad sensor, replaced it twice. Called in tech from Lubbock, who found nothing wrong. But it kept happening exactly at 3:07, not a minute before, not a minute late. It was a Tuesday when they first noticed the wet footprints. Cora Blanchard, a high schooler stocking cereal, saw them first. She'd come around the back aisle near the cold cuts and saw a trail bare feet. Small ones, like a child's, but wide at the toes and too long. They started just outside the double-door meat locker and led inward. No puddle, no trace backward. Just forward, like someone entered from nowhere. And the prints? They weren't just wet, they stank. Like pond water left too long under a sunless sky. They pulled security footage. That was the mistake. The tape showed no one. No kid, no customer, no employee. But the camera above the plastic bag dispensers at checkout caught something else. At exactly 3:07 a.m., every paper bag along aisle 1 folded flat, then stood up again. As if something pressed down on them. Then let go. Like breath, long, deep, measured. Almost rhythmic. That's when the manager, Barry Kellum, shut the place down for 2 nights. Told corporate it was rodent fumigation. But he stayed inside. Both nights with Harold and Cora, along with Ricky, watching every camera angle, walking every aisle. Nothing happened the first night. Second night, they almost didn't make it out. Barry was the one who said it. He whispered it at first like he didn't believe it himself. The walls ... are swelling. Harold put his hand flat against the end cap by the detergent shelf. Jesus, he muttered. It's warm. They watched as the plastic shampoo bottles trembled in place. Not shook, trembled. Like something huge was shifting behind the drywall. You could see the faintest bulge ripple outward, right under. The paint ... then the power died ... all of it. Not like a flip switch, it died. The fluorescents didn't flicker, they just went black. The backup generator never kicked in. Cameras blinked off, silence. Then they heard it, a long, dragging inhale, deep and wet, like someone struggling to breathe through a throat half filled with fluid, then exhale. Hot, thick, carrying a scent like sour meat left too long in a closed truck bed. They couldn't see their hands, but they heard the scuttle. Not footsteps, something crawling. Wet flesh dragging over tile. Ricky started screaming. Then stopped. Just ... stopped. When the lights blinked back on a few seconds later, Ricky was on his back, eyes open, mouth open wider, like he'd drowned. On dry land, his chest wasn't moving. His clothes were soaked, though nothing had touched him, soaked and stinking like swamp. Harold vomited. Cora ran. Barry didn't move. The autopsy said cardiac arrest. But the coroner noted something strange fluid in the lungs. Murky, thick, almost gelatinous. No explanation. Barry never came back. Called in his resignation that morning and disappeared. Moved east. No one ever heard from him again. Harold lasted another week. Claimed he could feel something watching from inside the walls. Said the pressure in the air changed, just a little, whenever he walked past the meat locker. He started showing up to work with deep bags under his eyes, arms covered in little scratch marks. Said he was dreaming of tiled floors and meat hooks that bled fog instead of blood. Cora told her parents she wasn't going back. Said the store knew her, that it was remembering her name. She swore she heard it whisper her name in the cooling units. Coo or AA ... just like that, soft, drawn out. Like a word formed with breath that wasn't meant to speak. The Night Stalkers started quitting. The ones who stayed wouldn't go near the locker, not even during daytime. One guy left mid-shift and never picked up his paycheck, left his phone behind. On his locker's screen, they found a photo. It was blurry, taken mid-motion, but you could still make it out. It was the produce aisle. Bananas and tomatoes stacked normal. But the far wall, the one behind the melons, was bulging, not broken. Not cracked, bulging, like skin stretched too tight, like it was about to split open. They tore the place down that winter, locals say. They put up a dollar saver there now. Clean, bright, open concept. No locker, no meat counter. Nothing beneath the tiles anymore, but the old night manager at the dollar. Saver says sometimes just after close he hears something shift behind. The dry goods shelf. Something deep, something rhythmic. He won't go into aisle 5 after midnight. Says the cans fall over for no reason. That the paper bags sometimes fold flat on their own and puff back open, like lungs, like breath. And last Thursday, when he opened up the store for morning stock, he found something wet trailing into the back storage room. Not out. In. It was one of those off-the-map gas stations tucked into the western flats of Van Horn, the kind of place that only drew in late-night truckers too tired to care or drifters with nowhere else to be. Off Interstate 10, about 3 miles down. Barely lit service road, it sat humming beneath buzzing yellow floodlights, a rectangle of flickering fluorescence and dust-covered shelves. The old Conoco station hadn't updated anything since 1989. Not the pumps. Not the hot dog rollers. Not the faded sign out front that hung crooked on rusting chains and creaked in the wind like it had a story to tell. If only anyone cared to ask. Celia worked a graveyard shift 11:30 p.m. to 6 a.m. 5 nights a week. She didn't mind it much. No real customers, just the occasional trucker who wanted to piss, stretch, maybe grab a root beer and a stale sandwich before heading back into the endless dark. Most nights were quiet. Long stretches of static from the radio, the hum of the cooler, and the faint tapping of moths flinging themselves at the windows. But then came the man. He started showing up in early February. First time she barely noticed. Just another guy. In a dark jacket, hood up, face in shadows, who wandered through the aisles without buying anything. What made her glance up again was how still he was. Not browsing, not loitering, exactly. Just standing, watching her from the back of the store near the freezer doors. It was 1:12 a.m. She remembered the time because the digital clock above. The coffee machine flipped just as he turned to leave. Didn't say a word that night. The second night, he came in at exactly the same time. Walked through the glass door with a soft jingle of the bell like he'd stepped through some invisible barrier only he could see. Same clothes, same slouched posture. And this time, he said something. "You dropped your toothbrush behind the dresser this morning." Celia blinked. Thought maybe she'd misheard. "Excuse me?" she said, trying not to sound unsettled. But the man just looked at her with this weird half-smile and turned around again. Walked out, calm as if he were stepping back into a dream. It rattled her, though. She had dropped her toothbrush that morning. It had rolled behind the dresser, and she'd had to get on her hands and knees to fish it out before work. She hadn't told anyone. Nobody else was there. She lived alone. Always had. The third night, he walked in and said, "The mole on your left thigh is new." She didn't even respond, just stared. This time, she got a better look at him. Pale skin. Grayish, almost like he hadn't seen daylight in years. His eyes were darker than they should have been, not just color-wise but in depth, like looking into a hole, not eyes. And his voice calm, even, with no accent at all. Like it came from nowhere. He didn't blink when she asked, "Who the hell are you?" He just smiled a little wider and walked out again. It went on for nights after that. Always at 1:12. Never a minute early or late. Sometimes he spoke. Sometimes he just stared. But when he did talk, it was always something that made her skin crawl. "You cried in the bathroom at 9:30 tonight. Your father's voice was in your head. You dreamed about the school bus again. The smell of diesel and blood. You almost jumped off the Pecos River Bridge last May, but you didn't. Why not?" Each time, she tried to brush it off. Told herself maybe she was being watched. Maybe there were cameras in her apartment she didn't know about. Maybe some psycho had been following her. But she changed her locks. Got a friend from Fort Stockton to sweep her place for bugs. Nothing. No one else ever saw him either. She tried reporting him once, but by the time the cops came out, he was long gone. They checked the footage from the store camera and he wasn't there. The door opened. The bell chimed. She was seen reacting, talking, even pointing. But no one else appeared on the tape. It got worse. Some nights, he'd repeat things she hadn't said out loud in years. Old things. Painful things. One night he said, "You still sleep with the light on when it storms," just like after he left. And then, the night that broke her, the night her legs nearly gave out, he stepped inside as always, the bell ringing. Low and lazy like a lullaby warped on a broken tape. He stood right in front of the counter this time, closer than ever before, no shelves between them, no room to pretend she was safe, and he said, "Why don't you go by Bonnie anymore?" The name hit her like a blow to the stomach. Bonnie. No one had called her that in 23 years, her birth name. The one she stopped using after her mother died and she was sent to foster care in El Paso. The name she buried when she got emancipated at 15 and had it legally changed. She hadn't told a soul in Van Horn, not a single person. Even the DMV just had her current name, Celia Monroe, not Bonnie. Never Bonnie. She couldn't speak, couldn't blink. Just stood there shaking, gripping the edge of the counter until her knuckles turned white. He didn't look smug. He didn't look satisfied. He looked like he pitied her. Then he did something even worse. He walked behind the counter. She tried. Tio screamed at him, tried to tell him to back off, but her throat wouldn't work. Her body wouldn't move. He was standing right next to her, too close, his cold breath hitting her cheek like winter wind. He leaned in and whispered in her ear, "You still blame yourself. But it wasn't your fault." She collapsed the moment. He stepped away, just sank down to the floor and sobbed, hands over her face. When she looked up, he was gone again. After that, she started researching paranormal forums, psychic phenomena, old desert legends. She found a story about a man in New Mexico who claimed to meet a stranger at the same time each night, one who told him things no one should have known. That man disappeared 2 months later. Another post from a woman in Nevada who swore a midnight customer told her secrets she'd buried deep, then vanished into thin air. She went mad, burned down her store with herself inside it. Celia stopped going to work, couldn't handle the 112 anymore, couldn't risk hearing another truth. Her manager called, then stopped calling. She stayed locked inside her apartment, with the curtains drawn and the lights off. She bought a bat and a gun, slept with both. But last night, she woke up at 1:12 exactly. Not because of a sound, but because someone was sitting in the chair by her bed. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her, head tilted slightly like a curious dog. Then he said, "You can't hide from truth, Bonnie." And in the seconds that followed, the room began to darken, not with shadow, but with memory. Real ones, terrible ones. The ones she'd locked away when she was just a kid. The night her father came home drunk, the screams, the blood. The back door left open. The last time she saw her mother's eyes. She thought she'd forgotten, but the stranger remembered. He stood up and walked toward the closet. She couldn't move, could only stare as he opened the door. And inside, hanging where she kept nothing but coats, was the dress she wore the night her mother died. She hadn't seen it in decades, hadn't kept it. She didn't even know it still existed. He pointed at it. "You've kept it longer than you think." Then he walked through the closet wall, not into it, through it. Like the air folded open for him. She didn't sleep after that. Just sat there until sunrise, heart pounding, eyes raw from tears. She didn't remember crying. It's been 3 nights since. The clock never works now. It's stuck on 112. She hears the bell chime sometimes, even though the station's miles away. And last night, she found a receipt on her kitchen table. No items listed. Just a timestamp, 1:12 a.m., and scrawled in the corner, in handwriting she hadn't seen since she was 5, were 3 words: "I forgive you." They kept the mirror in the break room because it had always been there, even before the place became a processing warehouse for Gulf Pack in Refugio. The mirror hung between the old soda machine and the bulletin board that nobody read. It was cheap, cracked slightly in the top right corner, with the kind of clouded silver that made your reflection look jaundiced and tired. Still, people used to glance in it out of habit, the way folks do Fix-A-Cap, adjust a shirt collar, see if their face looked as beat down as they felt after 10 hours, under flickering fluorescence. But after the third person said something about it, really said something, not just joked, it started getting weird. It was Tina first. She was a sorter, 50-something, always wore her hair in a tight braid, never smiled unless it was payday. She told Martha, the shift manager, that she saw someone else in the mirror behind her. Not just a shape, not a shadow. A boy, pale. No eyes. He moved closer when she turned to look. She thought it was some prank at first, but when she turned around, no one was there. She refused to eat her lunch in the break room after that. Then came Manuel. He didn't tell anyone for a couple days. When he finally did, he was shaking, hand halfway to his cigarette, even though he wasn't supposed to be smoking inside. He said the mirror didn't show what was behind him, it showed what was inside. Said he saw his father, long dead, holding him under the water in their old bathtub in Corpus, just like when he was a kid. Everyone figured Manuel had been working too many doubles and maybe hit the sauce again. But even the ones who rolled their eyes stopped checking the mirror after that. The towel went up 2 weeks later. It was just an old beach towel someone had left in their trunk, stretched over the mirror and pinned with 2 thumbtacks at the top. It sagged like wet skin but stayed up, mostly. Once in a while, it drooped on one side like something had tugged on it and then let go. Nobody talked about it openly. It was just the mirror. Everyone avoided that side of the room. They took their lunches outside or ate standing. Even Martha stopped making rounds in there. Once the rumors spread to the day crew, upper management sent someone to look. A guy named Brent from corporate. He came with khakis and a clipboard and a forced grin. Took notes, looked at the mirror, lifted the towel. He laughed. It's just old glass, probably warped. He didn't last the day. According to Corey, who worked the forklift in the back bay, Brent walked out during lunch without saying anything. Just set his clipboard down, stared at the towel for a full 5 minutes, and walked straight out the front gate, never even looked back. His car stayed in the lot for 2 days before someone came to tow it. That was about the time they tried taking it down. Rodolfo, maintenance, was told to remove it and toss it. Simple job. But when he came back, he looked pale. It's bolted through concrete, he said. I unscrewed it, but it didn't come loose. It's like it grew into the wall. They didn't press it. The towel went back up, firmer this time, with duct tape. They told themselves it was superstition. Nothing more. Maybe the place had bad lighting, maybe people were stressed. Still, no one used the microwave under it. No one stood in front of it for long. If they had to, they turned their back, always shifting their eyes, watching the towel in the reflection of the fridge. It was a Tuesday night when it happened. The towel slid off on its own. No one saw it actually move. But when Jordan walked into the break room around 3:27 a.m. for a cup of burnt coffee, it was on the floor, flat, like it hadn't fallen but had been laid down. The mirror was exposed again, and something about it looked different. He said the glass was darker, like someone had painted a thin film of oil on it. It didn't reflect the soda machine or the clock on the wall. It only showed the person in front of it. Just them. And not even them exactly, an older version maybe. Sicker. Thinner. Jordan backed out of the room and didn't come back until dawn. The next day, someone pinned the towel back up, but the air changed. Something was wrong with the room. You could feel it. A pressure, like being underwater. Like the mirror had become aware that it was being hidden. Then the dream started. People reported seeing that same break room in their sleep, only the walls were wet. The mirror was uncovered and bigger, stretching from ceiling to floor, and in the dreams they walked toward it even though they didn't want to. Some said they saw family members in the glass. Others saw themselves, but not quite. Their reflection moved differently, slower, off rhythm, like it wasn't mimicking them anymore. Then Karen disappeared. She was the quiet type, new to nights. One morning she didn't clock out. Her car was still in the lot. Her lunchbox was open on the table. The towel was on the floor again. Nobody could find her. The security cameras didn't show her leaving. In fact, the feed skipped 3 minutes of static during her usual break time. When it resumed, she was gone. They called the sheriff. He walked the place with his flashlight, asked questions, wrote things down. He glanced at the mirror once and never again. Asked if there'd been any mental health issues. Then he left and didn't follow up. Official story was missing adult. Likely voluntary. People started quitting after that. Not dramatically, just not showing up anymore. Some packed their things, others left mid-shift. The rest started bringing in their own hand mirrors. Wouldn't look up at the wall, wouldn't. Turn their backs on it. It got to the point where they boarded up the break room entirely. Hammered plywood over the entrance. The towel stayed under the boards, but the sounds kept coming at night. Especially past 2 a.m., you could hear things through the break room wall, scratching like nails on drywall. Sometimes a low, rhythmic thudding like footsteps that didn't have anywhere to go. Other times it was voices. Whispering, layered, almost like a radio stuck between stations. People would pause during their rounds, look down the hall, then keep walking faster. Martha left a month later. Left a note on her desk that said, "It knows who we are." Now and then someone says they saw something in the polished metal of the bathroom sink, or in the freezer door's reflection. Something watching from behind them, not shaped quite right. Sometimes a customer wanders in late looking for the office and stops in front of the boarded-up break room. They tilt their head, listening. Say, they hear something in there like crying. Then they leave. No one touches the boards. Not anymore. The building still runs, somehow, skeleton crew only. People come and go. They talk less, laugh less. They work fast, keep their eyes down, and never look at the mirror in the break room of Gulf Pack and Refugio. Even if you paid them. Even if you begged because some of them believe it's still watching. That whatever moved behind the glass that night never stopped moving. That it's waiting. And that each time someone dares to lift that towel or hears the whisper behind, their name in the hum of the vending machine, it gets just a little closer. It was just after 10 when Calvin slid the bay door shut at Murphy's garage, the metal groaning louder than usual against the quiet prairie air. Canadian Texas had long since gone still for the night. Main Street deserted, the bar 2 blocks. Over barely flickering a yellow glow from inside, and not a soul walking the cracked sidewalks. He'd done one late oil change on a state trooper's cruiser, and now he was finishing paperwork while sipping lukewarm coffee that had been cooked to bitterness sometime around 7. He should have gone home, but the silence, the creaking of cooling steel, the faint buzz of fluorescent lights overhead, he liked it better than the half-lit trailer he returned to every night, where the only thing waiting was a recliner that didn't recline and a fridge that wheezed like it had. Emphysema. He was wiping a smudge of grease from his forearm when he heard it, the soft crunch of tires over gravel. Not a roll-through, a slow pull-in. His hand froze mid-wipe. No one came into Murphy's this late. Hell, Murphy himself hadn't come in for months, the old man dying last spring after collapsing behind the cash register. Calvin had kept the place going out of habit, more than anything. Habit and debt. The bay doors were all shut, but through the slatted office window, Calvin saw headlights approaching low. Square ones, the kind you didn't see anymore. No LED blue or halogen white. These burned a dull amber, like fog lights through nicotine haze. The shape of the truck behind them was boxy and solid, long-hooded, built before designers decided curves were better than corners. Calvin stepped out into the lot, wiping his hands on a rag that left streaks instead of cleaning them. The truck was idling now. An old Ford, looked like early 70s, maybe 71 or 72. Mint green, oxidized down to a chalky seafoam. Chrome grille dulled by age. It backed into the lot slowly, parking with exacting precision at an angle, not facing the shop but toward the side where the gravel ran out and the grass took over. The engine clicked off. The headlights stayed on for a moment longer, then winked out. Calvin squinted, frowning. He knew that truck. Not one like it, that one. The door opened, and out stepped a man in a tan coat, canvas, dusty, jeans worn down to thread at the knees. A narrow-brimmed hat tilted forward enough to shadow his face, but when he lifted his head, Calvin's breath caught in his throat. "Evening," the man said, voice smooth like whiskey poured slow. "Got time for a quick look?" Calvin's throat felt dry. He knew that face, not from a picture. "From memory, he started, then stopped. The man smiled. Not wide, just enough to show he knew. "Yeah," he said. "I figured you'd remember." Calvin didn't move. His eyes locked on the man's. "I went to your funeral," Calvin said. His voice sounded hollow, like it didn't belong in the night air. 1996. You died. You burned to death in a crash out on Route 33. The man's expression didn't change. "I remember that," Calvin blinked. "What the hell are you saying?" "I came to say thank you," the man said. "You pulled me out the first time. Back in '87, remember?" Calvin did. He'd been 23, not long out of school. The Ford had flipped 3 times outside town, landed in a ditch half crushed. Calvin had been driving behind it. He'd crawled in, broken window slicing. His shoulder pulled the driver out by the belt loops as the engine caught fire. "You saved me that time," the man said. "But it didn't stick." He turned, walked slowly around the front of the truck. Calvin's boots finally unstuck from the ground, and he followed. "You died again," Calvin said. "I keep trying different routes," the man murmured. "Different speeds. Sometimes I avoid the crash altogether. Sometimes it's worse." "What the hell are you talking about?" Calvin snapped. "You some kind of ghost? Some hallucination? What is this?" The man looked up, his face suddenly tired. "You ever rewind a tape too many times? Starts to warp, doesn't it? Lines across the screen. Sound gets all warbly." Calvin didn't answer. "I've been stuck in that stretch between mile marker 19 and the river bridge," the man continued. "Every time I try something different, I end up here or there or nowhere. Once I walked for 3 days and never saw the sun." Calvin felt the hairs on his arms stand up. The air had changed. It wasn't cold, but something made him shiver. "What are you?" "I was a man," the stranger said. "Then I was a body. Then something else started driving." He leaned against the hood of the truck. "I don't get out much. Most times I just restart. But tonight, I remembered you. You pulled me out. That gave me minutes maybe, enough to come back." Calvin stared at him, trying to see any hint of untruth, any flicker that this was some elaborate prank. But the man didn't blink like normal people. Didn't breathe either. "Not really. You shouldn't be here," Calvin said finally. "I know," the man whispered. "That's why I won't stay." He reached into the truck and pulled out something small, round, metal, dull. He held it out to Calvin. "This fell off the dash. Been rolling around for years. Thought maybe it belonged to you." Calvin took it without thinking. It was a button, an old one. Dark red plastic, cracked. Down the center dot his breath hitched. He'd worn a flannel shirt the night he pulled that man from the wreck. Tore it wide on the barbed wire when he carried him up the ditch. That button had popped off. I lost this, Calvin said, voice barely audible. I know, the man said. I never forgot. Then he climbed back into the truck. Wait, Calvin said, but the door was already closing. The engine turned over with a groan and a cough. The headlights didn't come on, but the red taillights lit like blood and fog. The truck backed up, slowly. Carefully, then it kept backing. Into the dark, Calvin watched, heart thudding like a hammer on bone. The truck didn't stop, didn't turn. It moved in reverse across the gravel lot, tires crunching quieter than they should have, into the grass. Then past the tree line. Then it vanished, not turned down the road, not disappeared behind cover. It just faded. Like mist drawn back into the sky. Calvin stood there until the sun came up, the button clutched in his hand, his knuckles bloodless white. He never spoke of it again. Never told anyone what he saw that night. But every so often, when he sat too long staring at the dark edge of the lot, he'd feel the gravel shift behind him. And once, in a dream or maybe something else, he saw the truck again, backing down a road made of bones, the taillights glowing. Like two dying stars and a man behind the wheel who had run out of time a long, long time ago. Electra wasn't much more than a fly speck on the map, an old oil town that never quite recovered after the rigs dried up. Most of the motels had closed or been turned into halfway houses or forgotten shells of aluminum siding and sun-blistered signs, but the Western Sun Motor Lodge still stood off Highway 287, stubborn and sagging, with a flickering neon sign that promised TVAC low weekly rates. The kind of place that didn't ask questions, didn't take cards, and still had real keys on plastic fobs with the room number stamped on them. Tommy had only been working the night shift there a month. It was his first job out of a rehab program in Wichita Falls. Nothing fancy, just a quiet gig to prove he was clean, sober, and capable. Most nights passed without incident. He'd clean out the coffee machine, run the linen count, and kill time watching static fuzzed reruns on the black and white TV behind the desk. The parking lot was usually empty by midnight. The last check-ins came through early, usually drunk oilfield workers or guys too wired to drive. And after 2 a.m., the lobby was dead. Except for the issue with Room 9. The first time it happened, Tommy didn't think much of it. A name appeared in the logbook after midnight: Samuel Gorel, written in thick red ink that smeared a little where the pen dragged across the paper. No one had walked through the door, and no headlights had passed across the grimy lobby windows. The bell over the door hadn't chimed. Tommy had been wide awake, watching a rerun of Bonanza. But when he flipped the logbook closed at 4 a.m., there it was, Samuel Gorel. Room 9. Paid cash. The key for Room 9 had still been hanging on the hook behind him. He'd checked it in the morning, key still untouched. Door still locked, bed still made. No sign anyone had been there. He asked Carla, the day manager, if she'd ever seen that name before. She shook her head and muttered something about kids screwing around. But the name didn't strike Tommy as something a prankster would use. It felt off, like a name out of an old church record or a dusty book. The second time it happened, he was paying attention. It was 3 nights later, near 2:30 a.m. He heard the faint creak of the front door opening, but no chime. The sound was subtle, like a breath sucked between rotting teeth. He turned, but the door was still shut. The air felt colder all of a sudden. He looked down at the desk, and there, right on the guest ledger, was the name again. Samuel Gorel. Same handwriting, same ink. And Room 9 again. He checked the cameras. Of course, there were old analog models, low-res and twitchy. The front desk cam had glitched just around that time. Static for 5 seconds, then back to normal. No sign of anyone. He stood outside room 9 for a long time that night, staring at the door. He didn't have the guts to open it. Instead, he waited until morning and convinced Carla to check it with him. There was something carved into the wall above the bed. Not spray paint, not marker carved. With something sharp. The same name, Samuel Gorel. Letters shallow and jagged, like they'd been etched by a key or a knife. The drywall dust still lay on the sheets below. Carla went pale. She made a joke about vandalism, but her voice was trembling. And she didn't make him clean it up. They painted over it. Next night, it was back. Each time, the carving was in a different spot. Once over the bathroom mirror. Once across the closet door. Once somehow on the ceiling, as if someone had floated up there and dragged a blade through the popcorn texture in looping cursive. Tommy started keeping a separate logbook behind the counter. A private one. He marked every time the name appeared. The pattern wasn't exact, but it always happened between 2 o'clock and 3 a.m. And it always ended the same, red ink in the ledger. And a fresh carving in room 9. He finally cracked one night and tried to remove the pen from the desk. It wasn't a motel pen, it was a heavy silver thing with a red cartridge, like something out of a lawyer's office from the 1950s. He tossed it in the trash, locked it in the supply closet, dropped it into the toilet and flushed. Every time. The pen was back on the counter the next night, cap off, ink ready, lying right next to the open guest log. Tommy started dreaming of the name. In one dream, he stood in the parking lot as fog rolled in from the west. Room 9's window was glowing faintly, even though no one had checked in. And behind the curtain, just barely visible, was a man in a dark suit with a wide-brimmed hat, smiling without teeth. In another dream, he was inside room 9. The light wouldn't come on and he could hear something scrawling over and over on the walls around him, a dry, scraping sound. When he turned in the dream, the walls were covered in names. Not just Samuel Gorel, but dozens, hundreds. All carved in the same jerky hand. Some of the names had been crossed out. When he told Carla about the dreams, she didn't laugh. Instead, she looked at him real serious and said, "We used to close off room 9. It used to be storage. But the owner reopened it a few months before you came. Said we needed the extra revenue, I think. I think it used to be something else." "What do you mean? Like before it was a room?" "It wasn't built the same as the others. No window in the back. The insulation's weird. You ever notice how quiet it is in there?" Tommy had. Dead silent. Like the air didn't move. The next night, Tommy snapped. When the name appeared in the book again at 2:17 a.m., he took the key for room 9 and marched straight out to the room. He didn't think, didn't hesitate. The hallway was quiet, floor, tiles sticky and cracked. Room 9 was at the far end, right under the buzzing exit sign. The door opened with a soft click. Inside. The room was pitch black. The bulb overhead wouldn't turn on. The bed was gone. In its place stood an old writing desk. Not like the particle board motel junk. Real wood. Oak, maybe. It looked antique. There was a chair pushed up to it, and on the desk was the silver pen, tip glistening red. The guest book lay open. Just one name written, large and looping. Tommy. Pritchard. He stumbled back and dropped the key. The door slammed behind him. He ran to open it. Locked. He screamed. Then, slowly, he turned, heart hammering like a fist in his chest. The walls were already carving themselves, not with a blade or a tool, but with the drywall itself peeling back like skin opening around a scar. The names spilled across every inch, layered, overlapping, bleeding through the paint and into each other. One name for every night, every shift. Every person who'd ever been drawn to room 9. Tommy clawed at the door, but his hands wouldn't move. They gripped the pen instead. He didn't remember picking it up, didn't remember walking to the desk, but he sat down. The chair groaned beneath him like it knew he was coming. The book flipped to a fresh page. His hand moved slowly, as if guided, as if something older than language was sliding into him through the cracks in the walls. The last thing he wrote was the date, and then the ink turned black. The next morning, Carla opened the door with a master key. Room 9 was empty again. Bed made. No writing desk. No sign of Tommy. Just the key on the bed. And behind the bathroom mirror, a new carving in the drywall. Samuel Gorel. Followed by a new name etched deeper than the rest. Tommy Pritchard. And underneath it, a question. Who checks in next? It started just after 1 a.m. on a Monday, the kind of hot, stagnant summer night where even the crickets in Gonzales seemed too tired to chirp. The old neon buzzed above the 24-hour QuickTime on Sarah DeWitt Drive, the red glow flickering like it couldn't make up its mind whether to stay lit or call it quits. Nathaniel Nate Harper, 29 years old and 6 months into his soul-sucking graveyard shift, leaned against the counter beneath a humming security camera, flicking through a dog-eared paperback with one hand and sipping lukewarm coffee with the other. The store smelled like old mop water and burned burritos. Fluorescent lights cast everything in a pale, corpse-like glow. The aisles, 5 of them, stocked with dusty chips, expired canned goods, and day-old taquitos rotating in greasy unison, were dead silent, save for the occasional creak of the freezer doors expanding in the heat. That's when he heard it. A faint scratching, high-pitched and distant, like the sound of a wire hanger dragging across drywall. He paused, holding his breath. The noise was coming from somewhere above near the tiles of the ceiling grid. Mice, he muttered. Gotta be mice. He tossed a glance at the ceiling, but the stained tiles looked no different than usual, some sagging from humidity, others yellowed with age or mildew. The noise stopped. He shook his head and turned back to his book, muttering something about needing more caffeine. But as the silence settled again, he heard something new. Not scratching this time, not skittering. It was heavier. Like footfalls, measured, deliberate. And directly above him, Nate set the book down and stood slowly, tilting his head up. The noise stopped again. He narrowed his eyes and took a few hesitant steps out from behind the counter, the soles of his shoes sticking slightly to the grimy linoleum floor. He walked down aisle 2 past the boxed cereal and crusty shelf of outdated candy until he stood near the back cooler. The hum of the refrigeration unit masked other noises, but the instant he stopped moving, he heard it again. Something crawling above the tiles. He stepped backward, heart kicking a little faster in his chest. Probably a raccoon or possum, he said out loud. But possums didn't sound like that. And they sure as hell didn't walk with purpose. He turned to go back behind the counter when something tapped. Just once. Directly above his head, he froze. The tile above him shifted. Just the slightest bend, but enough to catch his eye. He craned his neck and squinted, and in that instant, the ceiling tile bowed inward, then slowly lifted up and away. Like a trapdoor being pushed open from above. Nate took a step back. From the opening, 2 long, pale hands appeared, hands with too many joints, long fingers that ended in cracked, yellowed nails. They gripped the edge of the tile and held. Then came a face. But it wasn't a face so much as a collection of the wrong parts arranged in almost the right order. Its skin was pale and sagging, stretched over sharp cheekbones and hollow eyes that didn't blink. It had a grin wide and wet, filled with teeth that weren't shaped right, too thin and too many. Nate stood frozen as it eased down like a spider, one limb after the other, unfolding itself along the ceiling tiles, The fluorescent lights flickered once, and he saw it, fully stretched out across the ceiling like it had lived there for years. Thin and tall, its back arched the wrong way, feet curled into claws, elbows bending the wrong direction. But what made Nate stumble back and nearly trip over a mop bucket was what it wore: a QuickTime name tag. Rusted at the edges, faded but still. Legible. Terry. He didn't know a Terry. No one named Terry worked there. Not now. But something about the tag, the way it clung to that mildewed blue polo shirt that hung like skin off bones, it looked old. Like decades old. And the thing wearing it. It grinned wider than it whispered his name. Nate. He didn't remember. Drawing his keys, didn't remember fumbling to the back room and locking the door. But there he sat now, on the floor behind stacks of flattened cardboard, shaking. The feed from the ceiling camera above aisle 2 was still on the monitor. He could see it, but there was nothing there. The ceiling looked intact. Pristine, even. Nate sat there for an hour, then another, until the sun started to rise. When the manager, Denise, arrived just after 6:30 a.m., she found the door unlocked, the store empty, and Nate's apron still behind the counter. He'd left his wallet, his phone. Even his car was still parked in the back, keys on the passenger seat. Denise filed a report. The police swept the store. They found nothing. But when they checked the security footage from the overnight shift, something strange came up. At 1:12 a.m., the camera glitched. A brief flicker, then black for exactly 10 seconds. And when it came back, there was a frame, just a single frame that didn't belong in it. A man with hollow eyes and a grin too. Wide stood behind the counter. His name tag read Terry, and the timestamp said 1976. The footage was archived and mostly forgotten. Denise transferred out a few months later, and the QuickTime got new management. But strange things kept happening. Customers sometimes swore. They heard footsteps above them while browsing for snacks. Once, a kid pointed at the ceiling and asked his mom why the man with no eyes was watching him. They said it was just the old wiring or the heat warping the ceiling tiles. No one wanted to admit what Nate saw. But employees never lasted long on. The graveyard shift after that. And late at night, when the lights flicker and the air goes still, sometimes there's a sound above the counter, a wet shuffle, followed by a soft, dragging whisper, Nate, and then a grin from the dark. The ice machine sat beside the rusted side door of the Lone Buck Motel in Llano, Texas, humming its mechanical lullaby all day like any other motel ice machine across the state. It was a squat, off-white beast of a thing, sun-stained and pitted. From decades of hill country heat, cracked paint flecked off its sides in little flakes like fish scales. Nobody paid it much attention during the day. Guests came and went, mostly construction crews, traveling salesmen, and the occasional divorcee halfway through moving out. They filled their coolers or paper cups with ice from its slanted chute, grumbled about the heat, and moved on. But at night, especially after midnight, that was when things turned. Locals whispered about it in that half-serious, half-joking way Texans talk about the strange. They'd say it was cursed, or maybe just old and screwy. But by the fall of 2014, folks had stopped using it altogether after dark. More than a few people had said the same thing. You'd walk by it, maybe just going for a smoke or taking the trash out behind the motel, and it would let out a shriek. Not a groan, not a mechanical whir, but a high, violent scream. Like something human and dying. It wasn't every night. That's what made it worse. Unpredictable, uncontrollable. Some said it was just metal contracting in the cool air. Others blamed teenagers messing with the wiring. But then came the jawbone. Clara Hutchins, the assistant manager, found it one morning just before dawn. She was a plain woman in her 50s with copper blonde curls and an ironed uniform shirt she never buttoned all the way up. She'd worked at the Lone Buck for years, never thought much of the weird things guests complained about. But that morning she came in early after the night clerk called out, and when she went to scoop a tray of ice into her Yeti tumbler, she noticed something. One of the cubes in the metal tray bin wasn't melting like the others. It had a pale yellow tint and a strange curve. She squinted, leaned closer, and nearly dropped the scoop when she realized what she was looking at. Bone. A human jawbone cracked clean through the center. One canine still embedded in the gum line, the root blackened and dead. She screamed and fell back, knocking over the mop bucket, and the echo of it rang through the empty hallway like a warning. The sheriff came out an hour later, had the whole thing taped off, and the machine wheeled away. The newspaper wrote a small column about it, human remains discovered in motel appliance. But there were no further updates. No missing person matched. The jaw. No blood was found in or around the ice machine. It was like the thing had just coughed up a piece of some long-dead secret, then clammed up. The motel replaced the machine with a newer model. Sleek stainless steel, LED lit, it didn't scream. Not at first. I heard all this from Dennis, the janitor who worked nights at the Lone Buck. He liked to tell stories during the graveyard shift, said it kept him company. Dennis had this glassy look about him, like he'd seen a few things too many in his lifetime. Ex-Marine, ex-husband, ex-drinker. Lived in one of the motel rooms permanently, room 103. He said the new machine lasted about 3 weeks. Then the noises started again, first soft, like a kettle coming to boil. Then full-on banshee wails that echoed into the laundry room. He quit shortly after that. What got to him wasn't the screaming. It was what he found one night after closing up. Said he heard a rattling from inside the machine, like something was trying to get out. Thought it was a raccoon or a rat that crawled in through the plumbing. He pulled the bottom grate open with a flashlight in his teeth and reached in. His fingers brushed something slick and warm. It moved. Then the light flickered, and for a split second, he swore he saw a face staring up from the cubes. Not frozen in them, made of them. Like someone had been screaming into water right as it froze. He left the next morning, packed up his duffel, and walked out without a word. I didn't believe him. Not really. I mean, I wanted to. Who doesn't love a good local legend? But it all felt a little too neat, a little too storybook. Until I stayed there myself. I was passing through Llano for a project land survey work for the county. The hotel I'd booked in town got double booked, so the Lone Buck had the only vacancy. Room 107, right across from the ice machine. The first night was fine. I didn't use the machine, not after what Dennis had said. But I heard it. Around 2:30 a.m. something groaned. Like metal on metal, but wetter. I chalked it up to pipes or bad wiring. Second night, I kept the TV on and tried to drown out whatever my imagination was doing. But at exactly 3:07 a.m., I heard it faint at first, then unmistakable. A scream. It didn't sound like it came from the machine itself, but from inside it. Like someone had been trapped behind the motor and was suddenly being crushed or ground to pulp. I ran to the window. The hallway outside was empty. The air smelled faintly of bleach and copper. I don't know why, but I opened the door. Something in me wanted to see it for myself. The machine was humming, silent. A light blinked green. The chute dripped clear, normal water. I stood there for what felt like minutes, waiting for something, anything. Then I turned to go back in, and it screamed. I whipped around just as a pale fog burst from the chute, like dry ice vapor in reverse. It smelled like rotting teeth. I swear I saw something move inside the vented slats, a shape, too tall to be animal, too twisted to be human. I don't remember getting back into my room. I just know I locked the door behind me and pushed the dresser in front of it, shaking like a leaf. The next morning I checked out. Didn't wait for the free coffee, didn't look back. A few weeks. Later, I called the sheriff's office out of curiosity. The guy I spoke with sounded tired, like he'd had the same call too many times. Said the motel was still open, though bookings had dropped off. I asked him what they did with the old machine, the one they found the jawbone in. He went quiet for a while, then said something that's kept me up at night since. They didn't dispose of it. They couldn't. Every attempt to dismantle it failed. The metal wouldn't cut, wouldn't bend. They sent it to a scrapyard out near Brady, and the truck that hauled it rolled into the river 3 miles down the road. Driver vanished. No skid marks, no sign of struggle. Just waterlogged. Mud and a half-empty cab. They never recovered the machine. The new one, still there. Still working. Still screaming, some say dot, and sometimes, late at night, guests report strange things about the ice. They say it has a taste. Metallic, almost sour. A few even swear they've pulled out cubes with little red veins frozen inside. Like nerves. Just beneath the surface. No one stays more than a night or two now. Locals steer clear. But it's there, waiting, grinding, freezing, and screaming. It had been a dry winter in Anson, the kind where the cold bites but the land stays thirsty. The clinic sat on the edge of town, right where the pasture began, its white brick walls aging in that silent way buildings do when no one's paid for. Upkeep in years. To the north of it stretched a narrow lot lined with mesquite trees, overgrown weeds, and a sagging barbed wire fence that separated the property from the field beyond. Folks around here didn't come to the clinic unless they had to. Most preferred to drive into Abilene or Stanford if they could swing it. But for sprained ankles, late-night coughs, or stitches that couldn't wait, this little building was the place. Roy McAllen was the groundskeeper, though calling him that was generous. He was closer to a night janitor, if anything, and at 63 years old, he moved slower than he liked. But he'd been with the place since '92, and the board kept him around because he didn't ask for much, didn't cause trouble, and always showed up. His job was to keep the front walk swept, mow the back lot when it needed it, and take care of the trash runs and light repairs. Roy knew every cracked tile, every flickering light bulb in that place. He also knew the grounds better than anyone. That was why he noticed the dirt dot it started in late January. Every morning, when he unlocked the maintenance shed by the fence line, he'd find a patch of disturbed soil about 20 feet out, just past the reach of the security floodlight mounted over the back door. Not the kind of soil disturbance you'd get from raccoons or armadillos. This was more deliberate, narrow, almost surgical. A stretch of dirt turned over like someone had taken a spade and worked it in straight lines. He'd smooth it back over with his boot, sometimes rake it flat just out of habit, and by the next morning it would be fresh again. Roy didn't say anything at first. He figured it might have been kids from town, maybe high schoolers sneaking back there to smoke or screw around. Still, something about it bugged him. The dirt didn't look walked on. There were no footprints, just turned soil clean, even, and precise. On February 4th, he got fed up and set a trail cam in the bush near the fence. Nothing fancy, just one of those old Moultrie models he used to take deer photos with. It was infrared, motion triggered, and snapped 3 stills every time something moved. He aimed it low, about knee height. Left it running overnight. Next morning, he found it turned halfway around, like something had spun it on its strap. The lens was smudged with something damp and brown. The SD card had photos on it, all right, but nothing useful. Just black frames and blur. In one of them, something faintly reflective showed up like wet skin or metal. It was hard to tell. That was when he started staying late. Roy didn't tell the clinic staff. They didn't care what he did after hours so long as the floor got mopped and the trash was emptied. Most of them cleared out by 9 p.m. anyway. He started bringing a thermos of coffee, parked himself in the old lawn chair by the shed, and waited. 3 nights passed with nothing. Just wind, the low hum of the clinic's vac unit, and the occasional howl of a stray dog down the block. But on the 4th night, just after 2 a.m., Roy saw it. At first, it was just the dirt moving. A slow, steady rise in the earth, like something was pushing up from underneath. It didn't make a sound, but the way the ground heaved, Roy thought of those old black and white videos of whales surfacing beneath ice. He stood up from his chair, heart thudding. His flashlight was off. He didn't want to spook whatever it was. The dirt parted. It wasn't a hand that came out, it was too thin. More like a limb from a spider or a hairless cat. Bone thin, with joints in the wrong places. It curled upward, feeling the air like it was testing for wind. Then another limb came up, and another. Roy staggered back a step, catching his boot on a loose root. He didn't fall, but he stumbled enough to kick a can lying near the shed. The clang echoed like a gunshot. The limbs froze. Then, in a burst of motion so fast it looked like film run in reverse, the limbs snapped back into the ground. The dirt collapsed behind them. The hole sealed itself in seconds. By the time Roy got the courage to walk over with the flashlight, the soil looked untouched, flat, dry, and still. But he knew what he saw. He called the sheriff's office the next morning. Said there were signs of trespassing and maybe a coyote den near the clinic. A deputy came out, looked bored, and suggested Roy lay off the caffeine. Ain't nothing back there but dirt and tumbleweed, he said, but Roy kept watching. He started marking the ground with little wooden stakes at night, noting which ones were disturbed. He even bought a second trail cam, this one with video. The thing came back. Always around 2 a.m., always from the same spot. Each time it came a little higher. Then it started looking around. It was a face, but barely. No eyes, just deep hollows. A ridge where a nose might have been. The mouth was wide and lipless, stretched across most of the head like a gash. It didn't blink. It didn't sniff or snarl. It just surfaced, tilted its head like a curious dog, and then slipped back into the earth, and it left the grave open. Roy found the hole that next morning. A clean oval about 3 feet across and 6 feet deep. The soil around it was packed tight, no shovel marks. Just earth removed like a scoop of ice cream from a carton. That was the morning he quit. He didn't tell the board. He didn't clean out his locker. He just locked the shed, got in his truck, and drove home. That night, he locked every door and didn't sleep a minute. By the next week, someone else was doing his job. A young guy named Miles lived 2 towns over and probably didn't believe half of what Roy mumbled when he handed over the keys. But the grave stayed open. And then the patients started disappearing. The first was a man in his 70s who came in for chest pains. He was admitted, kept overnight for observation, and then gone. Nurses swore they'd seen him asleep in room 3 around 11 p.m., but when they came back after shift change, the bed was empty, and the window hadn't been opened. Then it was a teenage girl from Stanford who came in for a fever. Same thing. Logged in, vitals taken, vanished. By March, 4 people had gone missing from the clinic. No signs of forced entry or exit. No footage worth a damn. Miles quit in April. He didn't give a reason either. Roy heard about the disappearances through town gossip. No one connected them to the grave, at least not out loud, but the clinic quietly stopped taking overnight patients. The lot behind it became fenced off with heavy-duty padlocks and posted signs warning against trespassing. But sometimes, when Roy drove past it, he still saw the dirt was fresh, and just once, he caught a glimpse of something. Watching him from the tree line beyond the fence. Its face was different that time. It looked like his own, and it was smiling. They didn't talk about the clock openly at the Seymour General Hospital, not anymore. Not after what had happened the first few nights in March of last year. But every night nurse working third shift in that sleepy West Texas town knew about it, knew to keep their distance, knew not to look up when it started again. There was no note taped to the wall, no official record in the hospital's maintenance logs, nothing in the shift change memos. But everyone who'd spent more than a week on nights learned the same silent rule. Don't touch the clock above. The nurses stationed in Ward C, and when it hits 3:33, stay put. Stay quiet, pray. The clock itself was nothing special. One of those big institutional plastic things with a beige casing and black numbers, the kind you saw in every school hallway or post office lobby across the country. Its second hand made that slow, scraping tick-tick like it was fighting its way. Around the dial, they'd replaced it at least 5 times. Each time, it worked fine for a while. Then, without fail, the new clock would start acting up, jumping forward, then stuttering, slowing around 3 a.m., and then always stopping. Not at 3:32 or 3:34, always 3:33 on the dot. And that was when the monitor alarm started wailing. The first patient was a farmer named Len Greeley, 68 years old, stroke survivor, recovering well. He'd just been cleared for discharge the next morning. The nurses had all liked him polite, a little lonely, but kept his spirits up, told jokes, gave the staff candy from a drawer he kept by the bed. That night, he was up watching reruns on a portable DVD player. The hallway was quiet. Carla Martinez was on duty 6 years into her night shifts and hard into most of what could happen between dusk and dawn. But when the flatline alarm went off at exactly 3:33, she bolted out of the break room. So fast she left her coffee steaming on the counter. Len's eyes were open, staring, mouth just slightly parted, like he'd been in the middle of saying something. But the monitor showed a flat line, and no amount of compressions or epinephrine brought him back. He was gone. No struggle. No pain. Just gone. Time of death called by the attending. 3:45 a.m. But Carla remembered what she saw on the wall when she ran out. The hallway clock frozen again. 3:33. 2 nights later, it happened again. A diabetic in room 217. Then a week after that, a teenager with post-op complications. It was always someone stable, someone expected to pull through, someone talking and smiling just hours earlier. And always the time on the clock stuck at 3:33 when it began. They started writing it off as coincidence. You had to, because if you really thought about it, it got too heavy. Too much like something was waiting, watching, picking its moments. Carla started bringing her own wristwatch, stopped looking up. Other nurses did the same. Some started timing their bathroom breaks around it, finding excuses to stay busy elsewhere in the building at 3:30. You could feel the shift in energy when it got close. Like the air got tight in your lungs. Like your bones remembered something. Your brain refused to name that the maintenance guy, Errol, replaced the batteries every week, replaced the clock again, even rewired the outlet and checked the breakers. It never helped. It would keep perfect time for a day or two. Then, like it, got tired of pretending, it would start slowing again around 3 a.m., limping toward that awful number. Then stop. There was a nurse, Peter Holloway, who didn't buy into any of it. Young guy, fresh out of school. Thought the whole thing was a bunch of rural superstition. Clocks don't kill people, he'd say, laughing while microwaving. Burritos in the staff lounge. Bad medicine does. The night he pulled solo coverage for Carla, who called in sick with what she claimed was the flu, something changed. Room 209, a man recovering from minor heart surgery flatlined at 3:33 a.m. Again, perfectly stable. No signs of distress. Peter didn't call a code. Didn't even move. When the day crew arrived at 7, they found him standing in the hallway, pale and soaking wet with sweat, eyes fixed on the clock. His lips were moving, but barely. He was repeating the same phrase over and over. It watches us from behind the minute hand. He never came back to work. 2 more incidents followed that spring. Then a lull. But every few weeks, there was a new story, a new stare, a new loss. A pattern no one could document, but everyone knew. Eventually, they stopped sending patients to Ward C unless they had to. Shift supervisors quietly rearranged assignments. Float nurses refused to cover that wing. And when asked why, they'd just say, "Not that hallway. Not tonight." Carla returned to her shift after a week off, though she was never quite the same. She'd walk the floor whispering to herself, counting under her breath like a child, learning to calm down after a nightmare. A few of the older staff caught her scribbling something in the logbook that made no sense. Times and dates that hadn't happened yet. Patients that weren't even admitted. But then, weeks later, the names would show up on the intake list, and one of them would flatline on the predicted date. Always at 3:33, she started telling people not to try resuscitation. Just let them go. They're not in there anymore. She whispered once, when a new hire tried compressions on an elderly woman who coded in room 218. That's not her. She's already on the other side. It's just a door now. Then came the night everything stopped. June 3rd, nearly a year after it began. No one was even in Ward C. They'd shut it down unofficially, claiming electrical issues and plumbing maintenance, but really it was fear. A heavy sort that seeped into the tiles and the paint, like mildew you couldn't scrub off. Carla was making rounds in Ward B when she heard the code alarm go off. She checked the board. Room 215. She froze. That was supposed to be empty. Hallway leading to C had been roped off, the lights dim. But when she pushed open the doors, they were humming. The fluorescents buzzing with static. The air was cold, unnaturally cold for a June night in West Texas. Every step echoed. And when she turned the corner toward the nurses' station, the clock was glowing. She swore it had never done that before. A soft, pale blue pulse behind the face. The hands were moving, jerking, racing forward, and then stalling. Over and over again, twitching like an insect caught under glass. Then it stopped. 3:33. The lights went out. She heard something wet drag across linoleum. A voice like dry leaves whispered her name, not from in front of her, but from inside her head. Like a memory she didn't own. She backed away slowly, heart hammering. But then someone stepped into view from the edge of the nurse's station. It was Len Greeley, still in his hospital gown, barefoot, eyes milky and wrong. And he was smiling. Behind him, more figures stepped forward. The diabetic, the teenager, the man from room 209, all of them grinning with mouths too wide, faces just slightly blurred like a photo mid-shake. Carla didn't scream, couldn't. She just turned and ran, never looking back. She left her badge on the floor that night. Quit by voicemail the next morning. They never reopened Ward C. The clock's still there, above the old station, but the glass has since cracked straight down the middle. Visitors aren't allowed down that hallway anymore, and the lights are always off. Errol says he doesn't go near it. "I fixed a lot of things in my day," he once told the new maintenance kid, "but time? That's above my pay grade." Still, some nights, the security cameras glitch, just a few seconds. Just around 3:33 a.m., and when you play the footage back, the The timestamp's gone. Replaced by a single word in static gray, return.